So often you down in London then?
I was down on Monday
Oh, nice.
giving a lecture at the London Institute for Healthcare Engineering
Nice.
about my book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was down in London giving a lecture and being shown round this new institute, which has been built and completed a couple of years ago or so. And I was just blown away with what they've done. They put this building next to St Thomas's Hospital.
Yeah.
And then there's a corridor that goes from the building into the hospital. And they've got all these startups and other companies doing medical engineering. And they can just walk.
Yeah.
So the stuff they're doing is just mind-blowing.
Such as?
Well, the one that I was really impressed with was you can genetically engineer a bacterium so that it will then produce insulin. And you also program the bacterium so that when it senses high sugar levels, it makes the insulin. So you swallow dried bacteria, they spring to life in your gut, they go, sugar level's rather high here, we'll make some insulin.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And so, like, who are these founders of these businesses? Like, describe their character and their texture of their brains and minds?
Well, I mean, they're all young people who've done degrees and research, and have come across something that's a really good idea, and have then just developed it. Like, there was a sonographer.
What's
sonographer.
That? I asked some really silly questions, by the way. What's a sonographer?
Sonographer is somebody, when you go to a hospital, if for example, if you're pregnant, neither of us are, but you know, if you're pregnant,
I feel pregnant.
then they'll take one of those ultrasound devices and put some gel on it, make you feel really uncomfortable, and then scan what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So that takes 3 to 4 minutes to do that.
I just had that on my shoulder, actually.
Okay, right. Okay, so it takes a few minutes to do it.
Yeah.
And the person is a real expert and is taking measurements as they're doing it and recording the pictures.
Yeah.
Quite often the measurements aren't quite right. And quite often the person might miss some particular details.
Yeah.
Right? The system that they've got is powered by AI, and you can do it in about 3 seconds. Well, not quite, but 5 seconds, 5 or 10 seconds of scan.
Yeah.
And then it does a complete measurement of everything that it needs to do. And it has very good what's called discrimination. In other words, it doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't accept something as being good when it's wrong, nor does it say something is wrong when it's actually good.
Yeah.
And that system will revolutionize the rate at which you can do those kinds of scans and make them much more accurate and much better. So save a lot of money.
Yeah.
Let me see, what are the other ones? I need to get my notebook to remember them all because it was Monday and I kind of forgot. But what else have we got? We got one for scanning. There's a neuroscientist who's got, again, a scanning kind of device.
Yeah.
But this time he's scanning your brain. And then pre-operation, doing a 3D walkthrough of
pre-operation
of what the operation is going to be. So you can then do it as a virtual thing. And then when you get to the patient, nothing is a surprise.
Wow.
And he showed me pictures of conjoined twins where they'd done this, then they successfully separated the conjoined twins. And within a few minutes, they had, because of course, if you cut heads apart, which is what they were doing, these twins were joined to the head. If you cut the heads apart, you need to make good.
So is this using AI to do this as well?
Yeah. So using the AI, then after you cut the twins apart, you then need to make good. So they printed the right shape and put it in place within 3 minutes.
That's mad. That's mad.
And it's stuff that if you're doing we think you've got to think about how an operation is done.
Yeah, cool.
You've got to think about how an operation is done. If you do an operation and you don't know what's inside the patient and you don't know what's going to happen, you can find yourself in deep trouble, and the patient is then at risk because you've got to keep the patient asleep and stable whilst you sort the problems out. But if you've planned it, if you've already got the scans and you know exactly what you're going to do and you've rehearsed it, then actually it's much less risky and quicker.
How would you? One of my favorite things is like cross-category learnings.
Yeah.
So I interviewed actually Rory and Oshin at the Devonshire, the Devonshire pub in Soho, which is now all the rage. So I had both of them on, and I said basically publicans are behavioural scientists to like a pint, because you're essentially both studying human behaviour.
Yep.
And we were there's a lot of sort of analogous things. You can look at a pub and it's kind of a great context for behavioural science. And then I was like asking Osh some questions, and then I was like, Rory, apply that to a different category, right?
Right.
So I think one of the things we were talking about is when you lean at a pub. Right, so you can go and stand in a pub and feel really insecure and if you're just stood, right, as human beings.
Yep.
And Osh basically said, if you lean, you don't need a seat, you just need places for people to lean, and suddenly you feel really comfortable. And Rory's like, fuck. Sorry, I swear as well. Just you're allowed to swear if you want. Rory's like, fuck. And he was like, we should do that on trains. Because how often on trains you need somewhere just to lean, and it was like that. Rory's got that brilliant mind,
exactly,
of cross-category learnings, with the AI and the context of separating twins who are conjoined.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the lessons that you've learned in all your career of business that could apply in terms of knowing stuff before you go into things, or having that almost that prudent path into the future?
Well, in that particular case,
yes.
I think it's very straightforward.
Sure.
The notion that what you do is to do a kind of effectively what's called a digital twin in some areas of engineering. So what you do is you build a model of everything that you're going to do, and then you walk through that. Even this restaurant. When we started this restaurant, we bought the premises, and then, although, it's a long time ago and the 3D models were fairly crude, we did 3D models of this restaurant. And then we literally sat and described how we would walk through the restaurant and what the experience would be, so that when it came to the design actually worked. And that principle of, you don't need to have built the whole thing, you just need to have worked out how to experience it, is very important, because human beings don't inhabit a digital world in the sense that we're looking at a screen and typing or whatever. We actually inhabit a physical world. That's how we've evolved.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is in order to understand what is going on, you need to give it that physical representation, so you can literally pick it up and walk through it and think about it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. It's that you've got to experience. I think that's what they did at the Devonshire, right? So they wrote a list with Charlie. They wrote a list of 38 hard things, incredibly hard things that most people wouldn't be able to do. Most operators, most restaurateurs wouldn't be able to do. Wood-fired oven in Piccadilly,
right?
Like a roaring red hot oven. They got the Guinness taps. They could do a fast speed of service, the faster than any other pubs. They got them from Czech Republic.
Right. Okay.
They kind of these idiosyncratic, esoteric things. Wrote that list down, as you said, almost like walked through it, that 3D model.
Yep.
Put all those things in place. And because they were so hard and no one else could do it, you've now got one of the most successful pubs.
Precisely.
And that's it, yeah.
Yeah, precisely. I think it is. And there's another technique that you can use in business.
Yeah.
And that's thinking about scenarios. I mean, people find it very, very difficult sometimes to think about business planning and how you.
I'm so bad at that. I'm going to ask you I'm going to ask you a lot of questions here, David.
I'll give you my tip for how to deal with it. It's astonishingly simple.
Right.
You just imagine yourself at some future date, right?
Okay.
Okay.
On my yacht somewhere.
Well,
I'm joking.
Hopefully not having taken a lot of money out of the government for supplying dodgy equipment. You imagine yourself at some point in the future, so let's say 5 years, or in other cases, the appropriate timescale might be 10, right? But it doesn't matter, some point in the future. And then you write yourself a story about what's happening and how you got there.
Okay. Write yourself a story.
Yeah. Now, the reason for writing a story is that human beings, again, if you think about this in evolutionary terms, we bond together by having stories. You know, we tell our kids stories. Everybody responds to stories.
Yeah.
In a sense, this podcast is it's partly stories, right?
Yeah.
That's what people like. They don't like dry mathematical equations or the teacher telling them the 3 rules that they need to follow, right? Mm-hmm. If you get told it in a story, you can relate to it. So just the same with business planning. Just think about yourself in, as I say, maybe 5 years' time, maybe 10 if you can do it. How did you get there? And what were the mistakes that you might have made and how did you correct them? And that's enough to be able to get through the fog. Otherwise, all you're doing is you're taking the current situation and extrapolating it. The future isn't going to be like that, but you can imagine a different future, particularly if you've been an eclectic reader and read quite a bit of science fiction and other stuff, then it's a lot easier to be able to think about these things.
There's a great book called The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr, and he basically says we're the Homo negan species, which is the storytelling species.
Yep.
He gets all into this, and I'm obsessed with it. I've read his, but he's been on the podcast, actually, genius. And yeah, he says like we communicate through shared stories. So and ultimately, like kind of the fire originally was as much as it was as protection, it was the epicenter and apex of storytelling, right?
Right.
And that's how we began to mobilize. So totally agree. So what you're essentially saying is, because I think in business it can get quite convoluted and processy in terms of, like, as you say, getting rid of that fog. You think you need this big Excel spreadsheet of like going into the future. And I think that will reassure a lot of our listeners who are not that necessarily that way. They're very creative, very kind of, well, some are actually, that's harsh actually. Some do buy into this idea of like trying to extrapolate 5 years into the year using an Excel spreadsheet. But I think the idea of a story, but like how would you, so you literally get a piece of paper, like what do you specifically do? And then what's next?
But here's the thing.
Sure.
You can't extrapolate.
Yeah.
That's a real mistake.
Okay.
You can't take
Yeah.
what's going on at the moment and just then project it forward, because everything is going to change. I mean, we're sitting here in this room, and I know, people eat and they always eat and they do these things, but the kit that you've got for recording this podcast is not the same kit that you would have had 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's enabling you to do quite different things that you didn't imagine were possible. Now, if you'd simply extrapolated from the kit that you've been using 3 years ago and the audiences that you were reaching and how the technology was and the social media, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. So you've got to project ahead. You've got to think, what is it going to be like? And then come back. It's much easier doing it that way than it is. Now, the spreadsheets have their place. You've got to, in business, you've got to have numbers. And, it's all very well having fantasies about how you're going to make money. But, in the end, it's got to come down to real numbers. But without the story, without the narrative, the numbers mean nothing.
And would you literally write this on a piece of paper? And then, so is there a specific example where you've got a panoply of different wonderful businesses?
I've got a great example. It's Abcam, which I co-founded with Jonathan Milner, who was then a research scientist at Cambridge. We met by accident, and I cover it in my book about how we sat down actually at a dinner table not dissimilar to this. And I had a chat with him. One of my rules is always be curious about other people, find out a bit about them.
Sure.
And I'll come back to that perhaps as we go on through this recording. But What happened
So
was...
just for context, what was Abcam? What was the...
Okay, how do we want to do... Sorry, I assume you can cut and splice.
Yeah,
and
but
stuff.
also it's very free flowing. So don't be worried about like being in order. It just jumps around. Yeah.
All right, okay, well, look, let's... Before we get on to the scenarios, let me tell you a little bit about Abcam, which
Yep.
is an antibody company.
Yep.
It sold... It still does, but in a different way. It sells antibodies on the web. Now, you've got to go back to the late 1990s when everybody was getting very interested in what the web might be able to do. And so I was sitting with Jonathan, and in my company, which was a company called Analysis, a telecoms consultancy company, I got very excited about all the web stuff. And we've been developing a lot of systems that underpinned our consultancy company. So we had a team of 6 or 8 software engineers in a consultancy company, just simply providing the back office systems. You couldn't buy these things off the shelf.
Wow.
So I had all this expertise. If I'd understood just what Salesforce would become, or some of these other companies, I would have done those things. But I was fortunate enough to meet Jonathan. Jonathan had this expertise in antibodies. He was doing research, and his problem was very straightforward, that if you're a researcher and you buy an antibody and you use it for identifying a protein in the reaction that you're trying to work out what's actually happening, then if it goes wrong, you waste weeks of work. And so what he wanted was reliable antibodies, reliable in the sense that if I use them in this context, then I know how they will work. So if I use them in this context, I know how they will work.
Yep.
And the thing was that one of his co-workers had an uncle who had a farm in Wales, and he thought of having a goat farm where you could raise these antibodies. I said, no fixed costs, right? This is how we do it. And I literally did the business model in my head at that dinner. And then that was, I think it was on a Monday or a Tuesday. And basically the following Saturday, Jonathan was in my office and we were starting the company.
Right.
Now, the company was sold to Danaher last year for $6 billion.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a success. It's quite a big company. And it was a success because we were first in the market and we were first to use web stuff. I remember other companies coming along to see if they wanted to buy us and being absolutely baffled by the idea that this web company would actually have some value. They didn't. It's strange to think about it these days.
Sure.
But they really didn't get it. They didn't understand what was going on. But as part of this thing, when you've got a new company and you're breaking completely new ground, and as I say, it's difficult for your listeners to understand this was completely new ground. When you're breaking this new ground, you need to think ahead and not extrapolate. So one of the things that I did is a little example.
Sure.
I took the current growth rate of Abcam and thought about how that might evolve into the future. So I was thinking 5-10 years into the future, and I did a little spreadsheet, these lovely evil spreadsheets. And one of the things was we were going to be constrained on the size of fridges that we had, because antibodies need to be kept at minus 80 degrees centigrade. And we were going to find that we just didn't have the fridge capacity to be able to deal with things.
Sure.
Now, that wasn't going to happen for 3 to 4 years. So we were in time to start a program of developing robot fridges, which would enable us to collapse down the number of fridges and the quantity that we needed, because we could then improve the processes. So by the time we were starting to get close to this problem of needing a lot of capacity, we already had the robot fridges in place.
Yep.
And just to give you some idea about what the impact of that was, we went down from fulfilling an order in 26 minutes to fulfilling an order in about 8 seconds. And completely automated. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that you do when you think ahead. But the more important one, the more interesting example, is getting Jonathan to write a story about what Abcam was going to be in 10 years' time.
Okay.
And I suggested he did it as an interview. So he did it as if he was being interviewed by somebody from the Financial Times in 10 years' time about how Abcam had got to where it was. And he explained exactly how Abcam had got to where it was. And together with the spreadsheet that I'd done and Jonathan's interview, we ended up in 10 years within about 5% of the revenue that we were projecting 10 years previously.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you're loving the episode. I'd appreciate a really small yet significant favor, por favor. Please, may you click the subscribe button, get in the comments, tell me what you think about the episode, tell me what you think we did on the show. It may not seem much, but it really helps us grow and helps us get bigger guests. Thank you so much. If you're a challenger brand that's absolutely killing it in D2C, but you're struggling to crack retail, then you've got to listen to this. Maybe you've got an Ocado listing, maybe you've got a Whole Foods listing, maybe you're absolutely killing it in Selfridges, maybe you're absolutely killing it in your farm shop and your indies. But my friends, making the leap, crossing El Chasm, crossing El Rubicon to grocery retail is not easy. It's the Champions League of FMCG. It's super hard. It means playing at a higher level, and that's where so many amazing brands sadly stumble. Look, retailers want stories backed by data, not dreams and a pretty pitch deck. And let's be real, supermarkets are not just going to magically make a space for you and your little brand. They need data. Something's got to go for you to get in, for you to get on shelf. And that is why I've got to tell you about North Star. They are the team that's helping purpose-led FMCG brands go from gut instinct dreams to unstoppable pitch decks that actually unlock retailers. North Star are not like another data company that force feed you data like foie gras, that act like a NASA space mission. It's super simple to use. Their team are amazing and they actually get the challenger mindset. North Star are your shortcut to smarter decisions, stronger pitches and investor confidence, all built specifically for challenger brands like yours. You don't need a massive sales team, you need North Star. Link in the show notes, click that link and you'll be able to book a free demo with North Star. Highly recommend that, and thank me later. Manifestation's a bit sometimes woo-woo, da-da, but having a specific story, right, of where you're trying to go. What would most people get wrong when they write that story? Because it can be sci-fi, airy-fairy. Like, what do you specifically need? Is it specific numbers? Is it?
Yeah, well, you need a bit of numbers, because otherwise you are floating too free. But the main thing is to say, what mistakes did you make and how did you then correct them? Or which mistakes did you avoid that you could see coming?
Yeah. Okay, so say with this podcast, right, I'm just going to do this live, right, because I think this will help a lot of people, right? So I've got friends who are starting brands in categories that are at the frontier of knowledge, essentially. So for example, I use it. Okay, so I've got a friend who's developing mushroom coffee and mushroom functional drink beverages. Yeah. I went to a mushroom, not like a Glastonbury mushroom.
No, but like I mean, mushrooms actually have particular nutrients in them that you don't get necessarily from other foods.
Lion's mane, reishi, and they've built a whole brand.
Yep.
Back 10, 15 years ago, everyone was like, mate, mushrooms, like, what you on about, right?
Yeah.
They're now going to the States. They're now going, but it's a new thing, right? So that's one example. My friend Amelia, wonderful friend, Bold Bean Co. 5 years ago, beans were basically baked beans you get on they're crap, right? I mean, I like baked beans. She's now created a whole new brand called Bold Bean Co. No one saw this coming, which is, she's working with Nigella Lawson, Thomasina Mers, and...
But that baked bean thing, can we just talk about that for a second? Because basically, I used to like baked beans, and I thought they're really dull, right? Yeah. So what do? So now, when I open a can of baked beans, I get either some harissa or unduja.
Yes.
And I add extra tomato paste.
Yes.
And I don't know, if I'm feeling, really a bit weird, I'll add some nampla or something, some Thai fish sauce, right? And it just changes the nature of what you're eating. I mean, I wouldn't put all of those ingredients in at the same time.
I do these
but the induja is, I mean, we have here at Boca, we have a fantastic, I mean, my mouth's watering as I think about it. Yeah. We have an induja pasta, which is, you take a bite of it and you think, what on earth is this? And it's addictive. You have to eat the whole plate.
And induja's orgasmically delicious, I think. But
I've no idea why.
yeah, I think it's the pork fat, and it just like, I don't know, this has got that like, I don't know, that
Yeah, so
tanginess.
add it to baked beans with a little bit of
So this is
tomato
essentially what
paste.
Amelia's doing. She's productizing that.
Yeah, well-
so she's gone into a category.
So here's the thing,
Yep.
right? This is the kind of thing that Rory Sutherland would like. It
Yeah.
is basically, here I was doing this with a can of baked beans. Why didn't I think of, if I like this, I bet you there's a whole load of other people who like it.
Yeah.
But tell you what I was doing. I was put off by my wife who didn't like the taste of what I was making. So I was never going to take it into a brand. But your friend Amelia, was it?
Amelia, but
She's onto a good thing.
she's onto a good thing. But then on the other side of that, again, in terms, we link this to this writing the story. Is there's another load of brands, prime example, which 5 years ago they thought they were on the money, which is the sort of the vegan meat category, which has basically gone off a cliff.
Yep.
And it's, as you say, you can't predict the future. We all want some sort of prudent path. So, like, say you're trying to write this story of where you're going to be, and then the numbers can sort of go up, help bring the story some specificity. But what should they specifically be writing down?
In the cases that you're talking about brands and so on,
Yeah.
the most important thing is what went wrong.
Okay.
And I remember doing I was helped start a thing called the Cambridge Science Centre, and I remember we did a kind of strategy meeting some years back now, and the staff we were sitting around with the staff and asking them to imagine the future and do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was the only one who wrote down that we wanted questions. You know, what question would you like answered about the Science Centre if you were in 5 years' time and you knew what had happened in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
And my only question was, what went wrong?
Wow.
Right? Okay. What went wrong? Because what went wrong tells you much more than just what to avoid. It tells you what to do. And if you use it properly, it's a very powerful question. And by the way, with the evolution of AI, whether you use Claude or ChatGPT or whatever else it is, they're very good prompt. You never rely on these things for complete answers, but you can give it a scenario and say, right, give me 5 ways in which this is going to go wrong.
Yes.
And one of those might be something you hadn't thought of. And that's the thing. It's, it's the converse of the brand thing. People are developing a brand because nobody else has really thought of that idea, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But correspondingly, what didn't you think of that was going to go wrong is the complement to it. And life is full of these, take a look at the other side of the coin, not just the one that you're enthusiastic about.
Yeah.
And you find out all sorts of things that will really help improve.
So do you know Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's business partner? He wrote he's got a rule called inversion rule. Yeah. So he basically he does this commencement speech at this university, and they go up there and he goes, right, people have asked me to give a speech, and he goes, well, obviously, people have asked me to give a speech about how to live a good life, and he goes, the way I'm going to answer that back to your thing is how to live a life of misery. And he goes, just avoid those things and you'll be happy. Back to what went wrong. And he goes, right, for me to be miserable, I would like to take drugs and booze. Yeah, first thing, it's quite easy to avoid that. I would be unreliable. I would be envious. And he goes, if you just don't do those things, it's like Steve Jobs got a thing, wisdom is prevention. So wisdom is just knowing what to avoid. Yeah. And I think what you're saying, mate, about like, okay, I was the only guy in that Cambridge thing who said, what's going to go wrong?
Yeah.
And I think if you've got this wonderful story in the future, but what are some other really good questions on that? Like, other than what went wrong, are the other ones that maybe reveal a prudent path to the future?
Well, there's the 5 whys strategy, which is which is basically why are you doing this, or why does this happen?
Yeah.
And then when you get the answer to that, be a bit like a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old. Why? And then keep going. And by the time you get to the 5th why, you've got the real answer.
Okay.
Right? Because quite often and that's what you need to do. If you're doing one of these scenarios, you need to be asking yourself, why does this happen? And because it's exposing the kind of systems and the mechanisms that you might just take for granted, but you actually have to make them explicit to understand really what's happening.
So I was to write my story for in 5 years' time with this podcast, right?
Yep.
So like, what would I do? Like, what's the first thing? Would I go and write it as an interview, or like, how would you go about doing that?
So Dan, give me a little bit more context about exactly what this question is, because I need to.
So basically, I think it's a good kind of example of finding out what went wrongs could be in 5 years' time, which will then help other people who are listening to this. Does that make sense?
Well, yes. Let's. What went wrong? Why did this podcast go wrong? I think it might be that.
Or do we need to know where we're going first?
Okay. So, unfortunately for Dan, this podcast triggered off because he's such an enthusiast, and he is eclectic and looks at a lot of different things. This podcast marked for Dan just a little departure from his focus on food-based, restaurant-based kind of podcasts.
Yes.
And he began to drift.
Yes.
And he began to find other people who were also slightly off the piste. And as a result, the Hungry Podcast became less and less about the things that he was really originally focused on. And imperceptibly, and it took a year or two, but over a year or two, although his audience grew, and it appeared to be that there were rather more engagements going on, in actual fact, the core was disappearing out of his podcast. And by the time he got to year 4, he realized it was too late. Somebody else had come in and was now quite prevalent in looking at the food and restaurant business, and had got a big following, not quite as big as Dan's, but in his core business, it had now overtaken the core. And now Dan was lost because he didn't know what he stood for anymore with the Hungry Podcast.
Interesting. Okay, that's so true. And I think that someone's told me about that. Don't build a subprime audience, whereby you can say you've got, as I said to you, like I could grow this audience significantly bigger if I went and interviewed. And as I've said to you, we've been approached by other business people in like just industries I'm not interested in, right? So I'll never really have what's the category, like it's not food and drink, like toothpaste and all that shit.
Oh, fast-moving consumer goods.
No. We interview a lot of those people.
Right.
I mean, like I only interview food people, so I'd never do like a cleaning product or anything like that.
Right. Okay,
that's just
right.
not me.
Okay,
it's not me. And I get approached with that all the time. I'm like, nah, I'm not interested. It's not me.
Right.
And I think that's so true. The other thing which I'd love to ask you, because you have worked across so many businesses.
Yep.
Is I've got a lot of ideas, and so in my future, what I want Hungry to be is I want it to be global. So I want to go. We've got a big audience in Australia.
Right.
I want to go and do a trip in Australia. I've got a lot of links in Australia because people come into London. One of our new sponsors is Australian. I want to go to America, blow it up there. I want it to be a big media company that's still on its course. Hasn't lost its way. Hasn't lost its swayed with the sort of the zephyrs of distraction. Do that. I'll then want to go into categories where we build the brand out. So like I always think about what's my consumer doing, or what's my audience doing.
Right.
So like I've thought about like Hungry AirPod cases. Little ways to get into people's brain. I know a lot of people cook when they listen to Hungry. So Hungry cookware. I'm just going to spit everything out.
Yeah, sure.
I've then wanted to do a recipe book, like a coffee table book, but instead of recipes, so we could have the David, Cleevely recipe, which is like your 10 principles of business. We've got every single interview that's ever been done, and I want it to be like a real statement piece in people's offices.
That's quite nice. I quite like that one because you're sitting on actually quite a big resource there.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And it also means that people like me would then obviously think about buying the book or doing the thing and telling other people about it. So that's a tick. I can see that one. The other ones I'm not really sure. Hungry kitchenware. I mean, how does that match with listening to a podcast? I don't really
because basically a lot of people
I can't cook. Look, I try to.
You do good baked beans,
Listen to a comedy program or something. Okay, so I could probably mix and do paste with baked beans and tomato paste whilst listening to a comedy program. Anything more complicated than that requires significant amounts of measurement or anything else, there is no way that I can do that listening to anything other than probably a Bach fugue or something. And even then, I probably will make a mistake.
Yes, of course. So those are some those things. Another thing we've got is this, which we've done. Like I've gone into brands and done this. We've got this, it's called Hungry House of Creativity.
Right.
So we go into brands. We don't Vita Coco, the coconut water,
Right,
and we basically teach their teams. So my big thing is sort of creative thinking. That's why I got on so well with your book, which we're going to obviously get onto. But that's another thing that could be a nice little revenue stream. But then and I think a lot of people, even that breath, it signifies a lot. It's like I've got this idea, this story of where I want to go to. Then I've got all this other stuff coming my way. I had a guy approach me the other day. He's like, "Do you want to set up a food festival in Shoreditch?" I'm very excitable.
Yeah.
Next thing I know, I'm on site. Then I'm in Soho House having a conversation, which is basically an ADHD orgy going on. And I was just like, "What?" I looked at my business partner, and he was like, "Mate, what the fuck? Like, who is going to run this?"
Yeah.
And I've just gone and I suppose it's a tension because I don't want to stick doing the same thing and become passé and pallid, but also I don't want to I don't know. I'd love to get your because a lot of people experience that. What's your perspective?
Yeah, you're right about not being passé, which is this. There is this fundamental problem, isn't there? You got to focus on the core business.
Yeah,
and that means holding things relatively stable and doing similar kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But of course, that mitigates against then actually innovating and doing creative and different stuff. So it's an eternal tension. I mean, as you say, it's in my book about this eternal tension.
Yeah.
There's this thing which Rory quotes about bees, about the bees and the honey dance.
Explore versus exploit.
Yeah. Well, I'm a beekeeper,
Oh, wow.
So...
what have bees taught you about business then?
Look, all the way back, when I first started beekeeping, I was 16, and I read this book, in a book, which was written in the 1930s. It said an enterprising child can be a beekeeper. You just need £5 for the hive and the other bits and pieces. Of course, it's very much more expensive. Even when I was a kid, it was more expensive than that. But I borrowed the money off my parents, and they wouldn't let me keep bees in the garden. So I started a beekeeping club, and at school, and I kept bees at this beekeeping club, and then I sold the honey to all the parents of all the kids. And so in my first year, I covered all my costs. Well, it wasn't quite my first year because you get the hive established and then you get going. But basically, I covered all my costs. And it was fine. So what bees taught me about that was actually probably my first enterprise that I ever did about how to run a business, and I had to run that as a business in order to make it work. So that's what bees taught me. But the bit about the honey dance is, as Rory says, if the bees come back and they do this waggle dance to indicate relative to the sun where the source of honey is, and the speed indicates the distance. About 80% of the bees will go off and actually follow the instructions. 20% of the bees will go off and do something completely different.
Yeah.
Now, in evolutionary terms, this is very sensible. In fact, in business terms, it's very sensible. If everything in your business is focused only on one thing, when that one thing changes, you're dead. So you want 20% of the bees to go off and find other things and by chance come across something else, so that when that one thing goes, you've got some resilience. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's a very important lesson. As I say, I cover it in the book. The thing is that the lesson back to your the Hungry podcast and what you want to do is that you need stuff that's sufficiently different to be robust, but sufficiently close that you can easily extend what you're doing. And if something goes wrong with any component of what you're doing, you've got these other things that you can rely on.
Yeah.
Now, how that translates, we're now being very abstract. I mean,
Sure,
we've
yeah.
shot
This will
up
help.
in
This will help
terms
a
of
lot of-
abstraction. Well,
Yeah.
we need to come back down to,
Yeah.
the actual practical. But that principle is how you filter and how you think about something. So when I think about the kitchen, when I thought about the kitchen utensils, I went, okay, how does that really work? It doesn't. I can't see the link. I can see a link.
I just want orange frying pans. Orange is our branding, basically.
Okay, orange frying pan.
I'm joking, but Le Creuset competitor.
Orange frying pans. I don't know. Well, the internal of Le Creuset is a kind of pale cream thing, isn't it? So
Yeah.
That's their brand. That's their brand and the brand of the orange, or you can buy them in blue.
Maybe I could have all the less principles around the frying pans, then you're learning whilst you're cooking.
Yeah,
I'm chatting bollocks.
I'm still not convinced.
This is so good, David, and I think because it's the whole explore versus exploit, and I think that 20%, isn't it? Didn't you say in the book that Google or Gmail was created from that 20% explore? So
Google,
exploit is basically when you know what's working, keep doing that. Sorry, but then the other 20% is when you're exploring new boundaries. And that's where some things, and that's how Google came up with Gmail, right?
Yeah, there's lots of examples like that about people doing things in kind of spare time. The Americans coined from 3M the term skunk works, which was where people went off and did projects that weren't really authorized.
Yes.
And enlightened managers made sure there was budget to do it, because they couldn't get formal approval.
Mm-hmm.
And then those things turned out to be the saviors of the company, or producing brilliant new products and new ideas. So there's always that kind of thing has gone on. Google formalized it rather more with their 1 day a week where you can do your own projects. And that's apparently how Gmail started.
Interesting. What would you say in your long career of business are some of the other formidable principles, boiling this down to first principle thinking, that make you robust, make you anti-fragile?
Have a network. Have a network of people who you've been generous to, and who will then help you. It's the secret of Cambridge.
Yeah.
Is the way in which that network operates and the culture of positivity. Before this podcast, you talked about competition versus cooperation. And
Competition, as you say in the book.
yeah, and that idea of, we've got competitors, but for heaven's sake, the world's a big place. And there is this, what the economists call an externality. There is this thing that is not obvious to you in the bottom line, but is about how the rest of the world works. I'll give you an example from my wife's art gallery in Cambridge, right? So she's picked this up and does it very well. She instituted a kind of Cambridge Art Week, in which the independent galleries in Cambridge, who you would think are deadly rivals, right? Because, if somebody goes into one art gallery, they're not going to buy from another one, right? So it's a classic apparently zero-sum game. But it isn't. If you step back and think about it, what all these art galleries want to do is attract more people. Why would people go to Cambridge to go and visit art galleries if they thought that Cambridge was a good place for looking at contemporary art? So what you do is you have a week in which you celebrate all the contemporary art galleries in Cambridge and project to the outside world that this is a great place for contemporary art. So then everybody benefits, and it's no longer a zero-sum game. And this is really the thing about how one should think about business. You can do much more by that kind of cooperation than you can by just thinking about business as somehow I'm competitive with you. I'll give you another example, which I did back in many years ago when I was doing my consultancy company in Cambridge, which was in telecommunications. And we were finding it difficult to recruit. Cambridge at that time was relatively small. I mean, Cambridge is doubling it every 10 years. It's slowed up a bit at the moment for various reasons, but it's been doubling it every 10 years. I mean, it's a massive growth city, fastest growing city the UK's ever seen. And but in the 1990s, we were finding it difficult to recruit people into telecoms. So I got my consultancy company to write a report called the Cambridge telecommunications phenomenon. And we got about 60 companies in Cambridge, all to claim that they were involved in telecommunications. And then we produced this report and distributed it fairly widely. And then anybody who was advertising for a job, used to advertise for jobs, remember, in newspapers. You're far too young to remember when that happened. And it used to say part of the Cambridge telecommunications phenomenon in the advert.
Yeah.
Now, the result was, if you think about that from the point of view of the external person, somebody who's looking for a job wants to be sure that if they've made a mistake, they can find something else. And so if you're in telecoms, you've just reduced the risk for somebody by saying, look, you might want to come to Cambridge. You've gone from somewhere where there's a lot of telecoms going on. But look, you come to Cambridge. If this job doesn't work out, you're going to have a big choice of other things that you can do. So you now have a lot more people applying for jobs in Cambridge.
Wow. No, it makes so much sense. And I think, like, there's so much, like, I've already learned, but it's like the story into the future and actually asking, like, what could go wrong?
Yep.
The network, the explore versus exploit.
Yep.
I think, what are some of the other, would you say, principles that have really helped you get to where you are?
So this thing about being a bit generous in your time and being curious about other people.
Yeah.
You know, if I'd sat down at that table with Jonathan and I had not been really curious about what he was doing and got him to explain to me how he was finding his research and so on, it's possible we would never have started Abcam. Right?
Yep.
If I'd not then immediately offered to help, we would not have started Abcam. I make it a principle of, you know, people come to me and ask for advice and stuff, and I stitch them together with, you know, with other people and stuff. Okay, so it takes a bit of my time. But in the long run, it really makes a difference. I don't want to get into kind of philosophy of karma or those kinds of things, but it's part of how the network functions. There was a chap called Richard King, who was an eminent person in Cambridge, who many years ago, when we started Cambridge Network, and it was the first of these collaborative networks to try and bring people together. And Richard met me at a party, a jazz party, of a consultancy company that would otherwise be regarded as a rival to mine. Okay? Mm-hmm. And he said, look, here you are, you're at a jazz party, summer party, of a company that would be regarded as your competitor, but they've invited you. He said, there's been a complete sea change in Cambridge about the way in which this now works. Instead of people seeing each other as competitors, as Clive Sinclair and Chris Curry did, there was a very famous incident, at least famous in Cambridge.
Who's Clive Sinclair? Is he?
Clive Sinclair did the ZX81.
Oh, I thought he
and
did.
Chris Curry did the Acorn computer, right, with Herman and others and Andy, and they had a punch up in the Baron of Beef in the pub.
It's called Baron of Beef.
It was called the Baron of Beef.
That's a great name for a punch up.
And it was, and it apocryphally, I don't know if it's completely true, but Clive Sinclair picked up a newspaper and slapped Chris Curry around the face, saying, "You silly little boy."
Yeah.
Now, for heaven's sake, these were two computer companies based in Cambridge. In the meantime, Microsoft had actually come to Acorn with a possible operating system and were asking to license Acorn's operating system, which would have then been the basis for MS-DOS, right? Mm-hmm. And they got turned down because they said, no, our operating system is far better than anything you could do, and we don't want to license it out, right? Mm. So that kind of narrow thinking about what the size of the market was, who you need to collaborate with, and having a fight in a local Cambridge pub when you're two tiny little... I mean, they weren't tiny really, because they were, at that point, they were quite big in computing, But if they thought through what was going to happen over the next 5 or 10 years, they would have realized the world was going to change.
Yeah, I love
and they would never have had that rivalry. So go forward a couple of years or so, well, more than a couple of years, about 6 or 7 years, and the formation of Cambridge Network and this attempt to then, as Cambridge Network said, bring together like-minded people from the business and academic community and connect them with the network worldwide, right, was intended to do precisely that. It was to cure that problem of parochialism and this idea that somehow we were all in competition with each other. It's ridiculous. There is competition, obviously, but the network effects, these externalities, this notion of...
When you say externalities... Just...
Oh, sorry, it's a technical term. What I mean is that... go back to the art example or my telecommunications recruitment example. If we band together, we can make the market bigger.
Yeah.
Right? We
Yeah.
can still compete, but we're cooperating in such a way to make the market, the cake bigger for everybody. Right?
Yeah.
Now, in economist terms, there's a similar kind of thing. It's about if you drive your car onto the road, you're making it worse for everybody. And there could come a point where everybody...
Why?
Well, if I join a traffic queue, and now I've joined the traffic queue, and I tip it over the edge in traffic vehicle management. Once a road becomes sufficiently congested, the carrying capacity of that road actually goes down, so the congestion actually gets worse.
Yeah.
We've all experienced it. You know, suddenly the traffic grinds to a halt, and then it takes hours to clear. Right? The road has simply become overloaded. Right? There was a car that tipped everything over that point. Right into right.
Yeah, yeah.
If everybody had clubbed together, they would have paid the last driver not to join the queue.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
But there's no market mechanism for doing that, right?
Yeah.
Now, congestion pricing is intended as a market mechanism for doing it. It doesn't. People don't like it, right? I can, for psychological reasons, which I understand. But the theoretical thing, the theoretical point still stands. If I could pay you not to join my queue, that would be worth it for me. But there's no mechanism. And that's what the economists call an externality. It is external to me. I can't do anything about it. There's no market mechanism for clearing it.
Any other examples on that?
Well, there's a similar one with the tragedy of the commons, which gets into human psychology. It's a very interesting one here. Imagine you've got some common land, and you've got some farmers who want to graze on that common land. Then
like Wandsworth Common?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but in the old days, before before...
Yeah, I'm just trying to...
I think Wandsworth Common more famous for badger hunting, isn't it? If I remember the terrible story. But let's not go.
Yeah. That's all good.
You would have, common land where you had the right to graze. Well, of course, the last person to graze might actually mean that everybody else's animals, sheep or cattle or whatever they are, don't have enough food. But at least this person's animal has some food.
Yeah.
Right? So for the community, the total value goes down, but for the individual, the value has gone up.
Okay. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, this is where it gets very interesting because there was a Norwegian professor and she got the Nobel Prize for demonstrating how in practice human beings organize themselves so that doesn't happen.
In human nature or like as in...
human nature.
Yeah.
Because actually we are fundamentally cooperative.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's only this kind of myth about this competition and fighting each other that causes us problems. We'll get on to how the storytelling works for that in a second. But basically, is the cooperation is the way that we work.
Yeah.
That's the main mode. It isn't the only mode, but it's the main mode in which we work. So she demonstrated that the way in which, for example, grazing or fishing was organized followed certain rules, and those rules meant that you never overgrazed or overfished. Okay? And we know that that's the case. We know that human beings do operate like that. And as my favorite joke is, I'm an engineer by background, but I'm really an economist, and I watch something working in practice and can't help wondering if it works in theory. Well, in this case, the theory that was constructed got a Nobel Prize. If you follow kind of neoclassical economics theory, everything is competition, and we're trying to
define neoclassical?
Neoclassical economics is basically we're all automata, right? And we're maximizing our utility through buying things at the cheapest possible price. And the firms are supplying us with stuff, and they're competing with each other. So they're trying to supply us with the maximum amount of profit, right?
Yeah.
And that interaction is what drives the economy.
Yeah.
Now, it's important for the economy. Of course it is.
Yeah.
But it isn't the only thing by any means about what's actually happening. And it's that broader perspective on how things actually work that then, coming right back to the practical example of Cambridge, how Cambridge then moves away from this myth or this framework of somehow we're all in competition with each other to actually we need the network, we need to collaborate. Sometimes we'll be in competition, but that doesn't really matter. What's most important is that we're making the cake bigger.
Wow, yeah. So, it's actually the episode that's going live next week. Seth Godin, I don't know if you've come across him, marketing genius, based in the States. But again, in terms of networking, is I've introduced Rory to him, and I think they're going to meet when they're in New York. But his whole thing is don't see your competition see them as colleagues, not competitors. And it's like, you come to our bean brand for really luxurious beans. You come to this bean brand for esoteric wild flavors. You come to this one for health. Like you can all do your own individual things, but it actually, instead of like being like we're viciously against each other. So how can you collaborate to, as you say, grow the bigger cake?
Yeah. So it's again, so the modal for human beings is one way, but I mean, you will develop conflict if things are too close, right? So if people feel you're intruding on their territory, then things can change, right?
Yeah.
So you need to keep things in such a way that you don't ever do that. But in terms of the bean brand way of thinking about it, as long as everybody holds to the idea that we're not competitors and we can learn from each other and we can develop, a new market where everybody thinks about beans in a different way, and now they're going to select the beans that they like based on their own personal preferences, then there's room for everybody, right? It's if, of course, this bean brand over here starts to actually steal this bean brand's market by doing a similar kind of thing. That would be a problem.
It's another tension, isn't it? It's like you were talking about explore versus exploit. There's like, on the one hand, you need competition, and on the other hand, you want cooperation. You're probably going to dance between the two, and it's just how far do you go each side?
But it depends on the product or service that you're producing. But this is another problem with economics. So, I referred to this thing called neoclassical economics, where we're all automata and we're all profit maximizing or utility maximizing.
Yeah.
But one of the assumptions that underpins that is that somehow we have collapsed everything into one single metric, which is the price, right? And we don't, right? You look at a brand and you're buying that brand because of other things that you might value. And it's not about the price. Any decent marketer will tell you that you set the price based on brand expectations. Let's go back to Abcam, selling antibodies. There was a huge pressure on us at the beginning to discount those antibodies because we actually had enormous margin. I mean, we're talking about 80%, 85% margin on an antibody, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And so you could afford to cut the price.
Yeah.
And the decision was taken, I was very insistent on this, not to cut prices because you were signaling to the market that these were quality antibodies. One of the other things we did was provide lots of information about whether these antibodies worked or not, saving the researcher time because if they looked through the data sheet, they could work out whether it was going to work or not, right? And if it didn't work, we gave them their money back. No questions asked. And we also gave them a present. If they wrote up why it went wrong, we gave them a present, which meant that we could maintain the price really very high in the marketplace. There was no need to discount, absolutely no need to discount at all. And it doesn't follow standard neoclassical economics. I can explain it in a kind of rational way about how all this operates.
Yeah. Do you want to come this way? There's a wire there. Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's all good.
So I can explain our pricing in terms of some kind of rational economic model.
Yeah.
But it's much more complicated, as you know and I know, and your listeners know. They're not basing everything on price. And, there's what beer brand says, reassuringly expensive.
Yeah, Stella Artois. Yeah.
Stella Artois. Now, Stella Artois in France is a standard brand.
Yeah.
So if they were going to do it in the United Kingdom, what they did was they shifted the price up so that everybody thought the beer tasted better.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting way of thinking about how you project yourself. By the way, I did look at the ABCAM website this week, and I was so depressed because when we had the company many years ago, we had Dolly the sheep, who was on all our packaging and on all our branding, and it was playful and it played to scientists, and there were lots of silly geeky puns and all sorts of stuff like that. When I went to the ABCAM website this week, it was just plain colour, corporate, and the first thing that came up was a banner that said 20% discount. And I went, oh.
Who are you saying
God.
antibodies to? Scientists or the public?
Scientists. Yeah, it's scientists who need them for research, right?
With you.
So you tune your brand to those scientists. You provide them with little toys that they can have on their laboratory benches, right? All those kinds of things that brand and, that kind of... You're playful but serious, right? We're with you, right? We're delivering something that really works for you as a scientist. We understand your problems. We're going to do everything we can to make your experiment successful. But we will do it in the same way that scientists do. It's the, whatever that comedy show is, the American comedy show is, where they have all these geeks on there, So that's exactly how you match what you're doing. As I said, I looked at the ABCAM website and I just, so depressed. I was so depressed.
Interesting. It's true. I think people buy. There's a whole myriad of reasons why people buy brands, but I think it's like, does the brand give you status? Does it give you connection to a tribe? There's way more reasons other than as you say, the neoclassical price. What you said, David, about you're an economist who sees things in practice and then sees if there's a theory. Is that right?
Yeah, economists see something working in practice and wonder how on earth they could explain it in theory.
What would those be for restaurants? What is there examples of that in restaurants? Because obviously you own Bocca di Lupo, fabulous restaurant.
Well, it's a family business. It's shared with the family. So that's the way that works. See stuff working. I'm in awe of the way in which Jacob manages to produce fabulous food within the very tight constraints on a budget for a restaurant. Now, and your listeners will understand how tight the margins are in a restaurant. And it's one of the biggest reasons, it's not the only reason, but several, for restaurant failures. And a lot of restaurants go out of business. But you've got these fixed costs, and then you've got the variable costs, which are partly staff, but mostly about the food. And how do you keep the quality of the food and the quality of what you're doing really high, but staying within the budget? And how does that get communicated to the people coming into the restaurant? How do you project the values? How do you make people happy? Because at the end of the day, they're going to match their entire experience of the restaurant with the bill at the end. And they're going to go, was that really worth it? Did that match? Or was the quality better than what I would have expected to pay? And that issue is one of multiple things that you have to do in a restaurant to actually be able to deliver that to the clients who are sitting at the table and enjoying the food.
Any other interesting sort of models or you've seen in restaurants and or food businesses?
Well, I mean, the restaurant, a menu design, for example. Let's look at, something working in practice. What does it work in theory? Well, I'd like to understand, I don't understand enough, about the psychology of how you arrange things on menus in order to then, from a restaurant's point of view, maximise your revenue, maximise your profit.
So Sam Tatum, who has worked with Rory, has got a great book called Evolutionary Ideas, and he's got this theory called, like behavioural science theory called chunking. So it's like you can either chunk up or chunk down. So chunking up would be something like Chinese five spice.
Right.
You put all those things together, and it's like you just buy the Chinese five spice. Chunking down would be something like IKEA furniture. Right.
Right. Okay.
So you see it, and both work. It's just whether you chunk up or chunk down. And he says in menus, like if you just get a menu, and again I talked about this with Osh and Rory, is I think, or we sort of bounce the ideas around, is why is Chinese food kind of like, the place around Soho hasn't got as great a reputation, or not maybe got a great reputation, but isn't as big as say like Indian food, or why is it complex? And basically, Osh said it's the menu. You go look at the menu; it's like overwhelming.
Yeah, completely
and actually,
overwhelming.
If they chunked up and said, right, this stuff is fucking spicy, this stuff is soft, and it's like, and it's just the chunking.
Okay, so
start a main dessert.
So there's two things here. Let's take the chunking up and chunking down.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean, because recently we went down and saw The Importance of Being Earnest with Stephen Fry.
I want to talk about him as well.
Yes, he's such a nice guy, and it was a great production, absolutely fantastic. But we didn't have very much time before, so we just popped into a Chinese restaurant, and of course there were about 200 things on the menu, something like that, to look through. Well, okay, so my in order to reduce complexity, I went for noodle soup, and then I had a choice of about 6, and then I knew what I wanted in the noodle soup, which was fine, okay? And, my wife went for a couple of things that she knows she likes off this vast menu when, you could have chosen anything, but actually we just went for stuff that we already knew. Now, that's fine about the psychology of it, and we do that at Bocca di Lupo. In fact, the reason why I decided to back Jacob in Bocca di Lupo was the menu structure. And the menu structure, for the first time I'd ever seen an Italian menu structure that made sense. Now, if you're not, now we've got a place in Italy and I speak Italian and I'm a bit more, I understand it a bit more. I'm much more at home with the way that Italians do menus. But that's not the audience for this place necessarily. It's people who like Italian food, know that, it's classically antipasti, pasta, and then secondi, and then dolce, and, understand that the classic thing, but don't quite get that you can pick what you want, and it doesn't really matter about the order. Nobody's going to take you through the classic English menu of you've got to do these things in this order or whatever.
Sure.
And Jacob broke that completely by, if you look at the menu structure, you've got fritti, you've got frutti di mare, you've got then pasta, there's padella from the saucepan, you've got whatever else it is in these categories. And then, genius, the first time anybody had really done this was small plates and large plates, with a pricing where the small plate was half the price of the large plate, even though the economics don't quite work out for the restaurant quite that way. But that's the way in which it. And suddenly this menu is accessible.
Well, and also what I love about it is how it tells you where the location of the dish.
Yes. This is from Lazio. This is from Puglia.
Like the story, and I believe one word can elevate everything, can change a story. So, I've talked about this. Again, this is in the book. People would, if we change the word rubbish to rubbish bin to landfill waste bin, like more and more people would recycle. Like literally one word, that dish, you put lassi on that menu, and I'm like, my brain is just gallivanting off into like a different gastronomic galaxy of different places to fucking, try things.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Now, why is that? I mean, this is the bit about you see it working in practice. Why does it work in theory? Well, I'm no psychologist, but it does strike me that human beings have only a limited capacity for absorbing and processing information. If I'm presented with a Chinese menu of 150 items, I'm just going to go. Unless I'm completely familiar with the whole genre of Chinese food, I'm just going to go blank.
Yes,
right?
Of course,
and I'm overwhelmed. I'm also probably in a slightly stressful situation. I know restaurants are supposed to be nice, relaxing places, but you are in a sense you're going to perform. You've got to perform to whoever you're with, and you're going to perform to the waiting staff because you don't want to appear to be an idiot, right? So it's actually quite stressful. The whole point about being in a restaurant is to recognize that people might be coming in and feeling slightly stressed. Let's make it really easy for you. Let's give you something straight away. Get you stopped being worried about whether you're going to get your food on time, or you're hungry, or you're a bit thirsty, or whether you're being paid attention to. I mean, one of the great stresses in a restaurant is I've come in and I've sat down here, and for 5 minutes nobody has come and talked to me, right? That's the point at which the stress level, we all know it, right? Stress levels, right?
Well, it's the idea of, again, this is from Rory and Osh's podcast last week, is the genius of the Devonshire is they're pouring the Guinness, and everyone thinks it's the speed of the Guinness that's being served. And Osh goes, no. What it is when you get them in, someone will go, and I goes, and basically it's like, I've recognised you.
Yes.
And he goes, that all you have to do is go like that, and suddenly all the anxiety and stress dissipates.
Correct. Exactly right. So getting rid of that stress is very, very important. Now, as I say, I'm no psychologist, but if you're stressed, you can't process information. So if I'm now presented with a complicated menu, with complicated wine choices, and I'm stressed, and the waiter hasn't arrived for 5 minutes, I'm going to be absolutely melting down, and I won't be able to choose properly. So that bit of overloading needs to be dealt with, and you need to think through all of those bits and pieces. Now, my daughter and my niece are starting a new restaurant.
Amazing. Whereabouts?
In Cambridge.
Yep.
We bought the cricket pavilion that was owned by Christ College.
Yeah.
Up on a new development.
Wow.
In Darwin Green.
What, Darwin as in Charles Darwin?
Yes, I mean it's named Darwin Green.
Oh, right.
It was previously there was a thing called NIAB, which I can't remember, the National Institute for Agricultural Botany or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was basically a plant research outfit.
Yeah.
And had a huge area. They're building, I don't know, as I say, Cambridge is growing really fast. So I don't know how many houses are on this site. It's probably something like 3,000 houses on this site. I mean, it's absolutely enormous. Anyway, so at the southern end, there was this cricket pavilion which hadn't been used for 30 or 40 years and was falling down. We managed to negotiate with Barrett's to buy it from them. Now, here's the proposition, and it is quite different.
Yeah.
The proposition is for a family-friendly cafe, which you find in Germany, and you find it in other places as well. And the whole point of this is if you go in, you're a mum or a dad, and you've got kids with you, or you're a family and you've got young kids with you, it's stressful, right? Come in, it's going to be not stressful because we're going to get you stuff quickly. We're going to make sure that if the kids yell, nobody else is going to be worried about it because it is a family cafe. After all, you can't complain if you walked into a family cafe and you've got kids running around. But a whole series of other bits and pieces that we've got designed and we're still working on. But that's the proposition. It is to think about that in a very from the point of view of the client or the customer. How are they feeling about the experience, and design the whole thing around
It's almost
them.
like writing a story about the experience and then almost asking
So we have
what could go wrong.
So we just had a board meeting earlier this week on Monday, and we went through personas.
What could go wrong for that, actually?
We had 3 client stories where things have gone really badly wrong and why they've gone wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So we were imagining the future in the way that I described earlier.
Yeah.
And how do you then solve those problems? And how do you, well, not solve the problems, how do you avoid having them in the first place even better?
Yeah. What were some of those? If you don't mind
Sorry?
me asking? What were some of those that came up?
Oh, the most disgusting one was somebody opens the lavatory door and there is a still used potty with baby wipes still lying around on the lavatory floor.
Yeah.
And that's because, in fact, here at Boca, you know, one of the biggest discussions was toilets. I mean, if you're in a restaurant, you really want the toilet, the loos, to be really good. And when we first opened our loos here, actually we got a lot of social media comment with, you know, the glass had engravings on it and other bits and pieces. We spent a couple of years ago, within the last year or so, we spent a lot of money redoing. You won't notice any difference, but the toilets have been significantly improved again. They were looking a bit tired. But toilets in a restaurant, you know, I know food is important, but the toilets aren't any good.
Again, Rory and I have hashed this out before, but I basically wrote a piece basically saying how to 10x the perceived value of your restaurant, any restaurant in London. It was like basically, I think it was like we start with the Indian curry houses and then Chinese restaurants. But then I was like, actually, any restaurant in London, it's like just focus on the toilets.
Yeah.
And Rush hairdressers Rush hairdressers. They're national brands, like every sort of high street, they've got a big Rush. Their whole thing was over-index the toilets. So, and then you can start using the 5 senses of marketing, which is like the smell. If you go to a Michelin-star restaurant, I genuinely believe, I went to St. Bart's, which is a Michelin-star restaurant yesterday.
Right.
They're like, as part of this new deal we've done.
Yep.
Walked in, honestly, if you want a great, astonishingly delicious restaurant, but I walked in and the toilets, I felt like I was in a spa. The smell, the sound, the music. They're playing Jamiroquai. They're playing a bit of, that's...
Yeah, you go in there.
It's music in the toilets.
We joked about having Enrico Morricone playing, but, he's exactly right. There's a bit of, kind of slightly sophisticated, but easy to listen to music going on in those loos. Yeah. I've been in a.
And also, sorry, I'm just thinking about this out loud. Sorry for interrupting, but you're saying about a restaurant is sometimes stressful. Especially like if you're on a business meeting, you can be in a restaurant. They can be high intense pressure environments. The toilet is actually the solace from the stress. Yeah. And if you've got a nice, clean, calm space, I've been in meetings before, like with potential sponsors stuff. And I'm like, it's kind of cantankerous, the conversation, the way it's bubbling. It's like you go to the toilet, it's like. And it's important. And or if you're on a date with a fit.
I was down in London, as I say, on Monday, and I came here with an old friend for dinner, and I said, "Do you want me to order?" He said, "That's one of my great treats in life is for somebody who knows what they're doing to order the food, right? Mm-hmm. Just removes all the stress about having to choose, right? Mm-hmm. So let's go back to." This works in practice. Why does it work in theory? It works in theory, I think, because if you think about the psychology of this, what you want to do is make people feel relaxed, and then they can choose, and then they're happy with their choices. And so the whole experience then becomes much better. So, and your point about smell is it's a very basic thing. If you're selling a house, you're supposed to have fresh coffee on and baked bread and all those kinds of things. Those things are really, really important. We're animals, right? We're not. I know, we think we're intelligent and we're thinking everything through rationally. But back to my quarrel with standard economics, that's not the way people are. They're not automata taking rational decisions. There are reasons why they're taking those decisions, but they're not quite as abstractly rational and mathematically correct as we would like to believe them to be.
Oh, you mentioned Stephen Fry. He gave you a book called The Folly of Praise or Praise of Folly.
Now, this is playing to my book. So I've known Stephen through some other people in Cambridge because he's a good friend of theirs. And then he turned up at Queen's College, where one of the alumni Demis Hassabis, who's got the Nobel Prize for Deep Mind.
Deep Mind.
Deep Mind.
We'll get on to that.
We'll get on to Deep Mind in a second. Anyway, so he's an alumnus of the college. He was invited back to the college to give a lecture, and then we had a dinner afterwards, right? So I mean, it sounds quite elitist, but it is an example of how Cambridge works and how the networking operates. So before dinner, we were all standing around having a drink, and there was Reid Hoffman.
LinkedIn founder.
Yeah, LinkedIn founder, who I've known for, I don't know, 20 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Because he helped me with another thing that I was doing in Cambridge, where I was actually building a network called the Centre for Science and Policy. So I know Reid, and so I told him about my book, and he said, "Would you like an endorsement?" I said, "Well, yeah,
please, mate.
No, I'm not going to say no."
Come and get some antipasti in it.
Yes. So, and then we bumped into Stephen Fry.
Wow.
So
Serendipity, yes.
So Stephen was standing there, and I introduced Reid and Stephen, and I said, "Well, I've just been telling Reid about my new book. It's called, Serendipity. It doesn't happen by accident." And Stephen immediately said, "Have you read Erasmus's In Praise of Folly?" Sorry, I'm trying to...
No, don't worry. It's a wonderful accent.
Can't quite match Stephen. He's just brilliant. And I said, well, of course, it's appropriate because Erasmus went to Queen's. I mean, who is
Erasmus?
He's one of the great figures of the Enlightenment. He's one of these people who pushed away from the medieval pattern of thought about things being kind of all mystical and unexplainable to actually saying things are rational. But at the same time, in his book In Praise of Folly, he talks about the reason why it's a good idea to be like these bees and not necessarily just do the same old things. Just experiment and do some really wacky things, because that will turn out to generate new ideas and new insights and new benefits and things that you couldn't possibly have otherwise thought of. I actually said, my response to Stephen was, "You bastard. I'm trying to finish my book, and you've just added at least 2 weeks to me trying to finish this bloody book."
Yeah.
Anyway, you said I could use bad words on this.
Go for it. Yeah,
podcast. Anyway, so I did read it, and there's a reference to it in the book.
Yeah.
And like a lot of this stuff, you read an awful lot of stuff. It doesn't necessarily pop up in a very direct way, but it really did shape a lot of that when you're trying to write a book and land it, that really did a course correction. And
how so?
Oh, because
sink into that bit more.
Basically, it gave me the confidence about how this notion about serendipity goes back a long way and has some very deep roots to it. See, I've been observing in Cambridge in particular, back to this, I'm observing in practice and wonder if it works in theory. And so I've seen this stuff, seen it work, but you don't know whether you've got enough data points and whether other people are thinking the same way. And I've drawn from Daniel Dennett and Stuart Kaufman and a lot of people on the theoretical side and the evolutionary thing about thinking about systems and so on. And then you get, do you know what? I missed Erasmus. I did need to know a bit more about some of the ways in which people who are not part of some of the more technocratic tradition that I was drawing on actually think about the problem and how they and it makes it much more rounded, right?
Yes.
You have more confidence
Yeah.
that what you're doing is founded on some more profound truths than simply just inventing something just because it's a nice thing that you've done in Cambridge.
So your book spoke to me on two of those levels, as we were saying before. Quite a few actually. The cooperation, love that. That's like ideas. I've been thinking about that for years. That's true. Different inputs equals different outputs. So, like, say I'm doing this podcast, I want to go and read. As I said to you, I'm reading Moby Dick, reading all sorts of random shit, because then that gives you these different inputs, different outputs equals edge. Those two were massive for me. And then the other one was when you talked about how, that idea of the edge of chaos. So as I said, I've worked at a challenger brand, right? I've worked for the company. And again, a lot of my listeners, we do these networking events, which you're welcome to come to. It's like they're sick. And I've seen what happens. A brand evolves, and at the beginning of its sort of genesis, it's quite chaotic. It's very serendipitous.
Yeah.
You're a small team. You're in a small office. Ideas flow quickly.
Yeah.
What happens is as you go along the adoption curve to scale, at some point, the shackles of process and order come in.
Yep.
And basically what happens, and I've seen this happen firsthand, you get some sort of, curmudgeon smothered corporate come in, which is probably a bit of a heinous way of saying it, but basically comes in and kicks out all the chaos, and you've got this really tight, rigid thing, and then the brand starts to go down like that, right?
Yeah. So
and it's
so
just like,
that kills it. I mean, it's exactly right. That kills it. You've got to have that continual playfulness. That's why Erasmus, in Praise of Folly, is really interesting, because it's this playfulness in doing apparently stupid things, right?
So yeah, it's this way. So
permission to do that. But the same time with a brand, you do need tight control on a brand.
Yeah.
Because the trouble is that people will invent things. Now, I once had this problem with my consultancy company, right? Now looking around, so we had a boardroom table that was about this size, right?
Yeah.
And I got so fed up with it, with what was happening to the brand, that I laid out every single piece of material that the company was producing, printed brochures and reports and other things, and I laid it round the table, and I got every single member of staff to walk round the table, and the question that they were supposed to answer for themselves was, does this look like the same company? And what was happening was, people were choosing the wrong font, or they were doing the wrong color palette, or they were just inventing something for themselves. Now that's kind of fine, but in terms of projecting our message out to the outside world, it was a disaster. And I had to get the entire company to understand that it was a disaster before I could actually then change things and get everybody back onto the even keel. Now let me contrast that with your stuffed shirt corporate coming in. Your stuffed shirt corporate, in the way you described it, simply cracked the whip and told everybody to fall into line.
That's why it's the edge of chaos. That's the bit that spoke to me deeply.
I did something different, right? I did something different. It was, look, I'm going to tolerate a certain amount of flexibility here, but you need to understand what my problem is and what our customer's problem is if they go around and see such a load of different messages coming out from us.
So I interviewed Jack Stein, Rick Stein's son, down in Padstow, who's a legend. And we were talking about I think another, which is one of those things that's, I like things that are both right and wrong. Yeah. So the 1% improvement rule, right? In business, like do 1% better, 1% better, 1% better, Kaizen. Well, actually, and so the example is Rick Stein had this vanilla sea bass dish on the menu, whatever, right? And he was sort of gallivanting around the world. I think he lives a lot of the time in Australia, doing lots of TV shows around the world. And so they had a new chef come in each time. And over the course of about 8 months, they had a new chef come in. So the first chef comes in and is right, I'm just going to add my little 1% improvement to this, to change the dish. Next, but because it's happening so slowly every week, you can't see it's changing. Yeah. Another 1% thing. And then actually, Rick comes back and goes, what the fuck have you done to a sea bass dish? But the issue is they couldn't see it because it was happening so slowly. Yeah. A bit like what you were saying about my podcast going off piece. If it happens so slowly, you can't see it.
That's right.
And I suppose with the different prints of your, around the table, it's like, if someone's just done a little type font, they may not recognise it, but then before you sit back, you're like, wow, what have we done here?
Yeah. So this is the eternal problem of running a business and doing branding and how you work. You need to evolve. You need to do those little changes. But at the same time, you need some kind of guiding principles about how this is going to work. Yeah. And imposing it on people, in my book, doesn't work, because people will, they conform, but they won't necessarily do things. I once met the head of the Swiss Armed services, right? So the chief
Swiss
head-
Army, like
head
Swiss
hon-
Army knife, or like the
Swiss-
actual army guy.
literally the head of the Swiss
Oh,
military.
sick. Yeah.
And she
Oh yeah.
she said, you have to get people through 4 stages, right? Mm-hmm. I hear you, and I understand you. I hear you, I understand you, and I agree with you. I hear you, I understand you, I agree with you, and I will do what you say. Right? And unless you can get everybody through all 4, you're lost. Right? And it's that understanding that just telling somebody to do something is never going to cut it. They have. So why did I walk them around the table? It's because they had to understand for themselves. Right? I hear you, I understand you. Do you agree with me? Yes. Right. Now let's all work together to get this brand back online.
Yeah. Fascinating. What are, I think, the deeper the wound, the deeper the wisdom. What have been some of your favourite failures?
Favourite failures? Ooh. Failures. Favourite failures.
The ones that taught you the most?
Yeah, I got involved in a generator company because I'd been involved with some of the founders before, and we'd done a base station company for 3G. Now, let me explain what that is. So you imagine you got your Wi-Fi router, right? But instead of being a Wi-Fi router, when you plug it into your Ethernet cable at home, your broadband link, it turns into a wireless base station. So you haven't got coverage in your house, you just plug it in, you've got a wireless base station.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Vodafone actually picked that up and did something with it. They did it for a bit. And that was very successful. We got the company to a certain point, and we sold it to the Americans, and that was great. We had made a turn on it. And then the guys who were doing that decided that what they wanted to do was to do power generators for, in particular, for doing standby power generators for mobile telecommunications masts. Mm-hmm. And there is a huge need for this, and we could do some real smarts on these generators, which weren't being done by the generator companies, which would allow you to monitor what was going on and manage these things and save huge amounts of cost. Mm-hmm. And it was a catastrophic failure because we didn't have enough money and capital to do it, but also because we were facing a market where you weren't really selling into people who valued what you had to offer. It seemed to us that it was going to be very valuable that your diesel generator never ran out of diesel, that it could operate hybrid and could use solar power, so you would become largely green if that's what you wanted to do, that you could tell when somebody had siphoned diesel out of the tank, that you knew when you should go and service the generator because we had got all the stats on it, instead of having to expensively do it after so many thousand hours of as a kind of like a zombie. All of these things were huge value propositions, but they never would get through to the final customer who was actually paying for it, because the entire industry was structured in a way that there were lots of intermediate steps. So nobody would actually see the real benefit of what we were doing. We actually had this thing rolled out for the emergency services network for the United Kingdom. And I believe probably some of those generators are still functioning. Mm-hmm. But the whole thing was constructed in such a way that nobody in any decision-making capacity who could see the value of it would be able to make that decision as to procure that generator. And it was such a lesson.
What were the lessons you took from it?
That the structure of the market that you're selling into matters probably more than the value of the product that you're selling. So let's take
No, because I'm just like, what happens when I do this is like I'll pick up on something I've heard elsewhere, and I think it's oh my god, yeah. There's a cleaning company called Purdy and Fig. absolutely smashed it, right?
Right.
A good friend of mine, Jack Rubin. Weirdly, we used to party together at Nottingham. Now he's now flying. And he said something to me. He goes, and I asked him a question. I was like, "What's one truth you believe that most people disagree with you on?" And his answer was, "It's not actually about the product or the brand. It's the market you're in." And I think people don't look like that. They think, I've got this best thing since sliced bread. I'm going to force it on you. And actually, he was like, no, there's a real demand.
Right. So look, in the UK, unfortunately, we have not got the same kind of training apprenticeship ethos that you have in a country like Germany or Norway, right?
Yeah.
The result is that the installation for home heating systems is done by people who are not as well trained or as professional as you would like them to be.
Okay.
In general.
Yep.
And we have this kind of culture in the UK, which is a bit slapdash. It serves us well because actually we are quite innovative.
Yep.
But on the other hand, we're not sufficiently professional and efficient as we really ought to be because we're not as well educated and as well trained, right? And we don't value those things so much. You know, people will be a bit down on anybody who's a bit too sharp and who's a bit too professional, a bit too slick, right? We all know that, right?
Yeah. We don't want a slick Rick.
Well, no.
Yeah.
Come on. And so when it comes to something like let's roll out heat pumps in the UK,
Yeah.
the supply chain and that cultural attitude, the lack of training, means you are facing a massive problem. Now, heat pumps would actually save people a lot of money. And in a place like Norway, where it's a lot colder than it is here, they've moved over to heat pumps. That's what they've done. Basically all homes are heated like that. Why isn't it happening in the UK? And the reasons are because of this complex supply chain and lack of expertise and training and understanding about how to make this actually work. And so you're right. You might have a product that's going to save you money and save you time, but the structure of the market, how it actually operates, and how people take decisions, and the cost of getting it actually used by the customer means that you're never going to get there.
Yeah. I think systems, again, this is another Seth Godin thing, but he says we often don't understand we're in a system, like a fish doesn't know it's in water, right? And it's like there's so many different systems, right? So you could have like the solar system is a system, right? We're just sat in this restaurant, but we're actually in a solar system. And he says the issue with systems is they're often invisible, right? And so, again, to your point, it's like there's these little intricacies, and it works both ways. You can either get slam dunked and sort of fucked by it, i.e. a business doesn't get off the ground, but other ways is you can, and what's Seth's thing is when you know you're in a system, you understand the system, the goal is to dance with it, not fight against it. It's like a fish trying to swim upstream.
Yeah. So this is a really important point.
Yeah.
You do need to understand how that system actually functions, and then I cover it in part in the book.
Yes.
About the complexity of things, and you've got to recognise just how complex these things are. And I've been on a government committee. At the end of last year and earlier this year, which then ended up with some of the recommendations going into the spending review. And the government committee was dealing with how to scale up companies in the UK. And to be honest, you've got a number of people sitting around the table who just thought there was one answer, that there was just going to be one thing, and all we needed to do was, liberate pension funds so they can invest more, right? Geez, the system is very complex. And I'll give you, in those terms, an example from Cambridge, and then I'm going to talk about something else completely different about sparrows and insects. But in Cambridge, we had a lucky break, and that was ARM. And ARM is the computer, they design chips. And then people make chips based around the ARM design. And your phone will have at least 2, if not more, ARM processors in it. And ARM is in, I don't know, at least probably nearly 100% of all the mobile phones in the world, right? So it's a very successful Cambridge company. And not as successful as NVIDIA for other reasons, but it's a very successful Cambridge company. But when ARM was sold, it produced dozens and dozens and dozens of millionaires. They were all tech savvy. They all had loads of money. They all wanted to know what to do with it. And what happened was it went into the Cambridge ecosystem. At the time, before that, we'd founded, I and Robert Sansom had founded a thing called Cambridge Angels, which has now invested over £1 billion into companies together with partners. But the injection of money that came in after the first 5 years or 10 years of Cambridge Angels operated just spun up the wheel in Cambridge. Now, once you spin the wheel up, how does a system actually work? It's not that somehow we can liberate capital to grow companies. What is actually happening here is there's technical expertise and there's money has now gone into the system.
Yep.
That now increases the chances that people are going to be successful with companies.
Yep.
Because they're now successful with companies, there's more technical expertise and there's more money flowing around. And because there's more technical expertise and more money flowing around, there are more successful companies and the circle keeps going.
Yep.
Right? And that's what's happened in Cambridge.
Well,
You can see how that system works. It's a bit more complicated than that. But when you get people thinking there is, a tax break or there is just more capital needed or something, just never believe them, because the system, you need to think about how the system works.
It's almost like inversion. It's like not looking at it from a brand product perspective, but a system and market perspective. I think with food and drink, someone once said to me, and I agree, 2011 was for food in the UK, it was like 1962 for music. i.e.,
But that was the point of it. I mean, Bocca was just getting off the ground.
Well, this is what I'm saying.
We were in the vanguard.
But it was like
we were like the Animals or whatever it was. Was the Animals around in '62? The slightly later, but they were about then.
Well, yeah. So you had this.
I mean, it was this kind of this different way of thinking about music, right?
Yeah, but then also I'm obsessed with the Beatles. I mean, I talk about this all the time. I'm obsessed with the Beatles, but with food and drink, it was the system working in its favour. So you had the rise of street food, which meant London and more London, but actually other cities were open to trying different foods because actually the risk was low. So instead of you having to go in and have a sit down at an Afghan or a Korean restaurant, you could go and have a little bow and try it. So trial went up for all these different cuisines. Social media.
Yes.
The rise of the foodie influencer.
Yep.
That again increased awareness. And then you had a few places, and have you been to Cole in Mayfair?
No,
Mexican?
I haven't. I heard.
He was saying how this whirlwind happened, and he was
right.
so he actually said Bocca di Lupo was one restaurant, 2011. He said Smokestack in Shoreditch. He said there was about 5 restaurants. He basically said which made London almost like magnets, and then getting more and more people interested. And then you had all these new chefs come in like, I want to be in London, it's the place to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the system changes.
And then the system shifts. Exactly right. So, I suppose it's a bit like, to take your analogy, music producer listening to the Beatles for the first time, early tracks and thinking, it was Decca, wasn't it, who took on the...
Yeah, well, they were originally, they were lambasted. They were like, you're not very good, yeah.
Yeah. But when I saw that original menu structure for Bocca, and I went, this is exactly it. This is a new way of thinking about food.
Yeah.
This is exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Right? I don't need to... Going back to your point about risk, right? About street food. Bocca is, in a sense, a lot of it is street food, actually. It's in that sense.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was just that vibe at the time, and stop being quite so pedantic about your food. Be a bit more free and easy about what you can mix and what you like. It was in the same way as the early 60s. It's that kind of liberation from the straitjacket. It's a very good point.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and I think also And you can also use the system to be super grateful as well. And because I think people complain about how hard business is, but I actually use it as, so I listened to a podcast with Jimmy Carr, right?
Right.
Really good one. And he was saying, timing, mastering the art of timing, is he was saying he couldn't be a comedian in the night. If he was same wit, same humor, he couldn't be a comedian if he was born in, 1890, for example.
Oh, yeah.
It's the systems had to move through, and you're seeing this in comedy with, Joe Rogan in Austin, created the comedy mothership. It's now a destination for comedians. Comedy's now back up and running. And I think with the podcast, like, I spent a lot of time in Lisbon. My mate lived out there. Great city. But I was like, you know what? I'd probably run out of guests like pretty quickly. I mean, that's a bit harsh on the city. But with London, you get everyone coming in.
So in my book,
Yeah.
I talk about a chap called Ayance, Spaniard.
Yes. I just can't remember that bit. yeah.
Well,
I probably should.
poor chap, because he invented the first working steam engine.
Okay, yeah. I can't remember
Right.
that bit. Yeah.
Well, nobody remembers him because basically he was isolated in Spain. I mean, he actually got it working for pumping water out of mines, which was what steam engines were for. But Thomas Newcomen, you may well have okay, James Watt. I mean,
He's
we
founder
use
of
watts now to measure
Founder
the
of Brewdog.
Yeah. Well, okay, so James
too.
Watt, you remember him?
yeah.
But if you look at the difference, is that Ayance didn't have a network. There was no network around him. There was no system into which he could plug.
Yeah.
Now, if we compare that with James Watt, with the Lunar Society. The Lunar Society was this eclectic group of people formed in 1765, which incidentally is the recommended retail price of my book, which is no coincidence at all. The Lunar Society had these eclectic people, Priestley the chemist, and Wedgwood, who was the manufacturer, and Darwin, who was a doctor, and and all these, Bolton, who was an engineer, and all these people, right? And Watt was drawn into that Lunar Society, and as a result had the resources, because he was plugged into a network that could make use of all of that, that could make use of what he had, and just as important, would be able to guide him, because James Watt, although it's not diagnosed, he was probably on the spectrum.
Yep.
He was a difficult man, and he was obsessed with lots of detail. And he wasn't suited to building a business, but the people around him, that network, supported him to be able to make it work.
I think the other thing which we've sort of danced around, but I'd love to sort of plunge into now, is kind of left field, different inputs, different outputs. And I'd love to know, like, what are some of your weird kind of curiosities in very peculiar places that you think could actually be really impactful to running a business, food and drink business? And it could be anywhere. It could be a big idea. It could be, maybe Darwin. Like, I've talked a lot about Darwin on the podcast with some people. But like, what are those big ideas that we should know about?
I mean, that's quite a difficult question to answer, because in the problem that I've got is that there's a lot of material that I draw on. I mean, you said you read all these different things like Moby Dick and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you'd probably find it rather difficult to explain how that then led into anything in particular, but it's very important. In my book, I talk about the fact that the intellectual foundations of this book is a bit pretentious, but still. Basically, look, these are the things that I've read that have influenced this book, and I can't tie them back. A normal academic book would have something where you'd say something and then there'd be a reference back and see this thing. Okay, I've got a bit of those, but mostly it is, look, think about this as a worldview.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you're then coming back to some big ideas that come out of that worldview, I suppose it's one changes. One gets older. One changes. The thing that's really struck me, particularly in writing this book, is the importance of social anthropology. Now, in social anthropology, you have this view that you observe what people do and you write it down. And you may be trying to explain it or put it into a framework. but you're mostly without value judgment, just observing what is happening. And it's that if you want a big idea, particularly in the something like the restaurant business, just observe what people do, not what you would like them to do or how you think they ought to behave. It's what do they actually do. And that tells you much more about how to run your business than anything else. I have a false quote from Machiavelli. I've not been able to find it. I thought it was Machiavelli, but it's basically, I treat people as I find them, not as I would like them to be. Right? Which is a very similar kind of approach to things. You know, we come at, one of the mistakes in business is to come along with a preset idea about how things ought to be. Right? And just keep an open mind that you'll have missed something and you need to be very careful about observing stuff. So in terms of a big idea, but that's a really big idea, it is basically just observe, right? My insights that we talked about, I mean, when we talked about the stress in restaurants and stuff like that, I'm observing myself, I'm observing other people, I'm observing, you know, what's going on. That's how you synthesize and come to a conclusion that actually the best idea is to make sure that within 2 minutes of sitting down, somebody has paid attention to you.
But I think it links back to, there's a golden thread to our conversation, David, but it's, and look, I've been guilty of this thing. Everyone's like, I've got this idea, I'm going to enforce it on the world. Yeah, and this product is going to change the world. And it's actually like, and that through the social anthropologist perspective or lens, it's like, actually, well, hang on, step back. Like, is this the right market for one? Is the system ready for this product? Do you have a network to make this happen? Like, they're much, and it's a much bigger perspective, but I think it's an important perspective.
Well, at a slightly more micro level, you know, can I explain this idea to you in 90 seconds?
Yeah.
And as a result, at the end of 90 seconds, are you enthusiastic? Because if I can't explain to you in 90 seconds, and if you're not enthusiastic at the end of my 90 seconds, there is something wrong.
Abraham Lincoln's got a quote which is, I don't like this man, I need to get to know him better.
Yes.
I love that quote, and I love your...
Although there are some people...
There are some
exceptions to that rule.
Yeah, especially if you go around, you know, Soho late at night when there's some drunkards pouring out the pubs. But I'd love to know who's someone's perspective that you kind of disagreed with at first glance, but then when you got to know them better, it kind of changed your worldview.
Oh, that's a really interesting one. The trouble is that after the event now, I can't remember ever disagreeing with them, so it's a bit difficult to back calculate. Who would I have disagreed with? I suppose there's a kind of some elements of politics where that's the case, where I may not change my interpretation, but I can see better the other person's point of view. Although accepting what people are saying in political terms is always rather more difficult, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I see it more as a journey. You know, I can't name any particular things, but over my lifetime, I've employed the principle as far as I can. Takes a bit of nerve, I suppose, to listen hard to people, and I know that my own worldview has changed as a result of that, and along the way I will have disagreed with those things and then found out more and then synthesized it and changed my worldview. As I say, the trouble is that now I'm sitting here with this kind of picture of the world, and I can't really remember what I disagree with people about.
But I think that's the point. Is it's what you're saying is it's further upstream. It's more of a way of existing in the world, which is a journey whereby you do sometimes you should, as a la Abraham Lincoln, if I don't like this person, I need to get them to know it better. I think I've had that so many times. I've met, friends of friends. I'm like, oh, that bloke's fucking annoying. And you actually have a pint with them. They're like, they're fucking sound. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't even have to be as big an idea of like, what do you disagree with politically? It could be something as innocuous as you don't like your mate's missus or something like that. Do you know what I mean? But what you're saying, it's a worldview and a way of being in the world.
I think that's right. We're getting very, very philosophical at this point, but you're right as well. There are people who I have perhaps not thought were, had great ideas, but then getting to know them better, unpick that. But there is this other thing about people, about your reactions. You have this instinctive reaction about people, within the first few seconds. And you're reading people, particularly if you've met a lot of people and you're a little bit older. And I'm going to say something which is maybe a little bit controversial. You should trust those first instincts. It's very important for recruitment, for example, in that literally the first 2 minutes of how somebody is coming across and what they're doing. Trust the instincts as to whether that's going to work or not. Because there's another problem that we have as human beings, which is we try to accommodate. And we need to get on with everybody. So you then try in a kind of Orwellian sense, you need to count the number of fingers, but remember what the truth is, right? It is.
What do you mean by that?
Well, at the end of 1984, Winston Smith is he's shown, I can't remember whether it's how many fingers O'Brien is holding up, but he holds up 3 fingers and tells him he's holding up 2 fingers, whatever the number is, right?
Yeah.
And gradually, Winston Smith's vision changes, so he only sees 2 fingers, right? Mm-hmm. And it's it's this accommodation that people have, ability to accommodate almost everything, without remembering, perhaps, that there was a little warning signal at the beginning about somebody, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to remember all of that. And now let me unpick this for why I'm saying this. So first of all, yes, you find out about people, and there's stuff you need to find out, and you understand them more. It doesn't need to mean to say that you would hire them or you would necessarily like them, but you do understand them better. Mm. And that's a bit more towards the social anthropology point. I'm not going to judge you. I'm just going to understand you, right?
Yeah.
There is the other bit, which is I'm linking into particularly business decisions, for example, hiring somebody. Your reaction in the first few minutes is something you need to hang on to. And then if you're hiring somebody in the interview, explore the implications of all of that and try and check whether that was right. Most of the time, that initial impression is probably about right. And what you're doing is you're exploring the rest of it. Now, I'm not giving you a completely straight answer to Abraham Lincoln's thing, but Abraham Lincoln, of course, let's think about where he was talking about it from. He was talking about it politically. So what he's doing...
I don't know much about that period, so just give some context.
Okay, so I as a school prize, I was given a book token. I was given asked what book I wanted, and I asked for a biography of Abraham Lincoln. So
wow.
I read a biography of Abraham Lincoln, and then I wrote an essay about it. So that, Abraham Lincoln is one of
It's quite serendipitous I asked you that then.
Well, yeah. so I know a bit about Abraham Lincoln. Now, he's a lawyer.
So give some context that was happening to in America, because I think it will help us understand. Go macro, then you can.
Oh, okay.
Macro understanding to micro is really important.
In America, you have a situation very similar to today.
Yeah.
There was an awful lot of factionalism going on.
Yeah.
And Lincoln's problem. So he gets elected in 1860, and he's walking into a firestorm, because since the 1840s, pressure had been building, in particular with people like, there's a chap called Calhoun, who was a Southern senator, who was absolutely well, you might think of him as completely crazy, but he was arguing for states' rights, for the states as individuals not to be part of a union, to have the right to own slaves, to do all these things, and basically a very individualistic kind of approach to stuff. And so Lincoln inherited a very factional and tense United States. Within a very short period, they were into what the Southerners would call the war between the states, which tells you something, which we know as the Civil War. And Lincoln had within his own party, the Republican Party, a massive set of problems where people were telling him to do different things, including his Secretary of State, who told him that the best thing to do to avoid civil war was to declare war against the United Kingdom. Lincoln's response was to sack his Secretary of State. Lincoln,
Why would they want war against the UK?
Oh, because if you've got an external enemy,
Okay,
then
yes.
you can unite the country. I mean, how many times have we seen that?
That was a bit silly by me. Yeah.
How many times have we seen that? It's a standard political play. Just find an enemy.
Yeah.
In order to unite everybody against that enemy. I mean, we can see that playing out in all sorts of ways at the moment.
Yeah.
Lincoln went, no, right, this guy goes. He's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do here is to bring everybody together. And he had all sorts of problems. In New York, there was talk of New York declaring independence as an independent state, not subscribing to the army. And he had, we think about the Civil War as somehow some great crusade that ended with the liberation of the slaves. The detail of this is nothing like that. Nothing like that. So in that context, looking at Lincoln's quote, Lincoln is saying, I need to build a coalition to be able to get everybody to work together for a common aim, right? What I need to do is to understand people, understand what their motivations are. He's not necessarily going to like them, but he's going to understand how they operate so that he can build that coalition, so that he can achieve the overall objective. And that I think is what the quote means.
No, it's so interesting, and it's like what you were saying. What's happening now? I really be like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. There's a cadence to it. What would you say from that book? Like, what pulled you to him, and what would you say are some of the lessons from that book or Abraham that you've applied to running your businesses?
Oh, there's another one which I'm not quite sure I get the numbers right, but it says if I'm given 6 or 7 hours to fell a tree, I'll spend the first 4 or 5 hours sharpening the axe.
That is so good. Yeah, that's something that kind of applies to, like, instead of trying to hack at the tree, i.e., this is our product, put it on the world. It's the same. It's the same thing. It's like look at the market, look at the system.
It's back to some of our early discussion where we were talking about visualizing things, thinking about the problem. My example of the neuroscientist who imaged the patient and then walked through how the operation was going to go. That's the equivalent of sharpening the axe and making sure that you've got everything in line. There's a big difference, for example, between the way in which the UK might approach doing a project and the Japanese. The Japanese will sit around for absolutely endlessly talking about the detail of what they're going to do. And then when they do it, it's done like that.
How would we do it?
Oh, we just dive in.
Yeah. But I love that about us.
Yeah. Well, okay. It's these things. I don't want to get back to evolutionary things, but these are different strategies for dealing with problems. Sometimes messing around and discovering things that the Japanese would not be able to discover by simply sitting down and talking about it turns out to be the right thing to do. Sometimes sitting down and detailed planning and working out everything and then doing it turns out to be the right thing to do. It depends on the project. We tend to apply this kind of, oh, come on, let's just get on with it, far too much.
Interesting. I'd love to know how you make or some advice or maybe mental models for making decisions under high pressure with imperfect information. Because, again, a lot of people listening to this, especially with what's going on with restaurants right now, especially what's going on with brands right now, the kind of common, what I'm picking up via osmosis and some sort of my sort of conversational tentacles in various groups is like, one, high pressure, and two, like, we don't know what the fuck's going to happen. What could you speak to that?
Right. So I think one of the things you would need to do is just not run around saying "Don't panic, Mr. Mannering." To sit down and actually think about what you do know. We've done the same thing here at Boca. I went through some of the data that we've got for the past year, where we were sitting at the beginning of October now. And what's actually happened over the last 12 months, and trying to think about that in context and thinking about whether some of the ups and downs were some to do with systemic changes in what was going on or not. But you need to go out and collect a lot of data, and just relying on rumor or hearsay, or although that's important because it tells you about the temperature and the general attitude, you need to be able to get some more data about what's really happening out there in the market and get some hard stuff. One of the things about restaurant businesses is that they think that the appetite limiting drugs now are actually potentially having an effect, right? I don't know whether that's true or not. It could well be. But people are, in general, because you can see that by sentiment analysis in the press, people don't want to eat so much. I mean, they are being very much more conscious about that. That is a secular trend that you're not going to be able to buck. So you need to build that into if you were telling yourself a story in 5 years' time about, it's 2030, what happened? Well, we recognize the trend that it was obvious in 2025 that people were going to eat less. But what did they value? You might say, well, what did they value? They valued really interesting food, and they wanted value for money. They wanted things that were tasty. They wanted to be able to not feel guilty about what they were eating, or I concoct a story, but you base it around understanding what's happening in the environment and then writing that story so that it's plausible. Now, the thing about human beings, about this story writing, about this the thing, is by writing the story, you're able to synthesize things and turn things into a framework that if you were sitting there with an Excel spreadsheet, you could never do, right? And so it's this balance. Get the right thing about the amount of information. Make sure you've got information. You're not basing this on, as I say, hearsay or the last person you talk to. And then just step back in that impartial way and think about what do those trends actually mean, and therefore what does it look like in 5 years' time? And making decisions under pressure might be a different thing. I mean, we talked about restaurants under pressure, and indeed they are. That tells you about that long-term thing and guides you on the immediate decisions. In terms of taking decisions immediately under pressure, well, I go back to the point that human beings don't take decisions very well under pressure, most of us. And you need to somehow relieve the pressure. Just if you think you're taking a decision under pressure, if at all possible, remove the pressure.
How would you do that? Literally, how would you do that?
Oh, well, I'll tell you one way to do it is toss a coin.
Okay.
I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that if you've got a choice between two alternatives, and you don't know how to choose between them, you might as well toss a coin.
Yeah, that's right, mate. Yeah.
You're not going to be any better, are you? I mean, so and particularly if the decision needs to be taken quickly, it's far better to take a decision than to avoid it. Now, Margaret Thatcher once said, I wait as long as I can before I take a decision, and then I take it, right? And that is, I think, a very good guiding point. but you need to recognize the point at which you make a decision, and you need to know that taking a decision is better than not doing something.
That's so good to hear. Taking a decision is better than not doing something.
But always recognize, just think about the circumstances you're in. Do I need to take this decision?
Yeah.
If I take this decision, am I, what are the consequences of doing it now? Not whether it's A or B or C. It's if I do it now. And in business, the worst thing you can do is close off options. Because once you've taken a decision, you've lost your options.
I think doesn't Jeff Bezos talks about one-way, two-way door decision making. You've heard of that. So one-way door is when you make a decision and it's like, can you come back from that decision?
Yes.
So then, but two-way doors, it could be something like a two-way door decision could be like, we're going to change. Two-way door decision could be like, we're going to change we're going to use a different type in India, right? A one-way door is we're going to change the name from Bocca di Lupo to Bocca di that. Quite. I think understanding that nuance is hard.
Yeah, and absolutely important. It's back to this point about timing.
Yep.
And do you need to make that decision? And can you make that decision and still, as you say, come back from it? Right? Mm-hmm. It's options in business are the most important thing. Have I still got options? Can I do this or that?
Yeah.
Right? Have I left those options open? If that happens, have I got some alternatives? That is the essence of running a business.
Yeah. What other I like the lens of social anthropology, because you're right. It's like we hear this thing that Ozempic's coming. I think Heston's just done a Ozempic menu of the fat duck. Everyone's like, oh fucking hell, you know what I mean? Like
he's got a good nose for trends. As Heston.
But what's going on with us? Like from a human, you understand it from have a better understanding than I do from a human nature level. A la bees. A la running from bears, what's going on in our psyche and evolutionary when something happens and we kind of get into that response mode?
Well, I mean, the thing about our inheritance in that sense is that it's always been important for us to take early decisions and to do things quickly, because otherwise, you're upping the risk. That timing is something which you need to be trained out of in a sense. People want to do, take a gut decision, but you need to be aware of what the consequences are. Now, it's that's all getting a bit theoretical. I wanted to just go back to Heston for a moment, because Heston is part of a whole range of restaurateurs, all of whom are experimenting and doing different things. Now, if Heston's Ozempic menu turns out to be genius, everybody will laud him and say, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Heston, you've done it again.
Yeah.
You've absolutely got the trend completely right. We won't be talking about it in 2 years' time if he got it wrong, right? So there is a survivor bias in all of this, where we applaud people who got it right, but of course, they're taking a decision which is almost random. In the grand scheme of things, if you didn't know it was Heston and you had a range of 100 chefs who were all doing these things, one of them has tried this thing.
Yeah.
Then it's effectively random.
Yeah.
One of them's just by chance done it. Is it going to work? I don't know.
Yeah.
But in the general trend of things, as I was saying, there is a general trend about weight and about eating and there is a cultural shift going on. Now, I can take that back to my book, because in the book, there's a bit of research done by some guys called Christakis and Fowler. They produced a book in 2011, which talked about how do people react when they're in networks. And as long as somebody is within 3 steps of you, how they think and how they behave influences you, because they'll influence somebody who influences somebody who influences you. And if they're fat, you're likely to be fat. If they're happy, you're likely to be happy. And that works through a whole load of other things. So in terms of the the trends and what's going on, you can probably tell if you listen to your network and are part of a big network, how those trends are operating. So in terms of a restaurateur, I would be talking back to this cooperation thing, competition. I would be talking to other restaurateurs quite a lot to pick up what's going on, as well as my clients to find out how they were behaving, because that will tell me an awful lot about the atmosphere in which I'm operating.
Yeah, I went to the pub. I went to the pub with Ashley Palmer Watts, who was the head chef at the Fat Duck.
Right.
Now does the Devonshire. There was CEO of Dishoom was there. Osh was obviously there. A few other Chris Pizza guy was there, and again, big operators, but sharing ideas. Sharing competition. It's like this is, and no wonder those lot are doing so well.
Yes,
it's
exactly
like,
right.
Wow, that makes so much sense.
Exactly right. And now those are the guys.
Yeah.
Those are the guys who are going to have picked up enough information from that network to understand where the trends are really going, what's really happening.
Yeah.
And therefore are likely to be the survivors.
What are other? Because have you heard of proportionality bias, where like we blow things up? Again, it's Sam Tatum, and if we may we think a big problem needs a big solution. We think a novel problem needs a brand new solution. We think something that's is kind of new, has never been solved before, potentially another category. And sometimes it could be something really small. So, like, for example, the small solution to the big problem is, when they did the when you're speeding, well, not when you're speeding, you shouldn't be speeding, but it used to say like 39, you're going at 39 miles per hour.
Right.
They changed it from a smile if you're going.
Yes, that's right.
Small
Changes.
Small changes, but actually has a massive thing.
Yeah.
What have those been in business? Because I think in business you can overcomplicate things and think you've got to do these massive, big changes, and sometimes it's something really small and inane that's sat right in front of you that has this huge change. What would you say those have been for you?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that there's a lot of overthinking and attempting to think that by matching the size of the problem to the size of the solution, or size of the solution to the size of the problem, is somehow the right thing to do, and it isn't. And you're quite right. If you think about going back to our discussion about systems are complicated things, and a lot of interactions. If you could find just that little place to tweak, and then the whole system then falls into a different mode, that's the ideal. And for me, it's if I would much prefer to think how the system works, how all these interactions are working, and to find the right thing. Now, you don't need to do any mathematical models or anything else to do this. You can do your own systems map by simply, get a wall or something and just put up Post-its up on the wall and then draw lines between them, preferably not a nice wall like this, preferably something you can draw on, and draw the lines between them, move the Post-its around. They're actually little apps. There's a thing called inspiration maps, which allow you to do this kind of thing, where you put blobs down and you can connect them and then move them around. And then you see how the whole thing interacts. And then you look for particularly things that are going round in a circle that are self-reinforcing. And you think, where can I intervene?
What do you mean by self-reinforcing?
Well, a self-reinforcing spiral would be in a restaurant. We're not making enough money. We're going to put our prices up. People stop eating quite so much, so we're now going to economize on something else. And so we're into this death spiral, and we're now losing money, so we have to put our prices up, and off you go. You're dead.
How could you do that positively?
Well, positively, I would say that there might be. We talked about menu structure. There's a really neat way of dealing with menus where you can present either. Imagine you present something in order of. You can have version A, B, or C in terms of. This price goes up, and everybody's going to choose the cheaper price, or you can give it with the full thing, or say you take off this and take off this, and it's cheaper. People will tend to go for the more expensive thing. There are all sorts of
choice architectures.
Which is the technical term for it. So you don't need to react by doing the obvious thing. As I said, price was the obvious thing.
But I think the greatest thing you've done in terms of small change to big problem, if you looked, again, let's imagine we took out all the restaurant menus in Soho, for example, where we are now, put them on this table, round here, this is kind of a rudimentary way of looking at a system. It's like, okay, right, we're going to just put, and I still think this is the best genius, obviously the food's extraordinary, I ate here last week, but is the Lazio. The region. Yes. That is just, you've just put one thing on a menu, you've told a story with story themes.
I mean, there's a story. There's some marzipan balls, which I had there's two actually puddings. One's called Palle di Nonno, which means grandfather's balls.
Right, sounds nice.
That is lifted from a fabulous restaurant in Rome.
Right.
And so when it's on the menu, it says Roma.
Yeah.
And the other one, which is another chocolate, is a chocolate marzipan ball, which was made by an old lady in a Sicilian village, and again that's taken from her recipe for how to do that, and that says Sicilia, or Sicily, if you're going to write it in English, but they're authentic. They're not. This stuff isn't made up, and that's the other point about it. That what's here is authentic. It's not. Okay, there's a little bit of experimentation, maybe a little bit of poetic license taken, but mostly, the point is about Italian cuisine is regional. It's not just spaghetti bolognese. In any case, spaghetti bolognese was invented in England. It's a bit like chicken tikka masala.
Really?
Yeah, it's not Italian at all.
What have you learned from being in Italy about like the way they do business? Like, I don't know, being in Italy, but like having a house out there, like.
Oh, how they do business? Well, it's a lot about the relationships and the culture. I mean,
Whereabouts is your house? Sorry,
it's in Tuscany,
lovely.
Just about an hour south of Siena. There's a little village called Montichiello near us, and there's a lady who sadly passed away called Daria, who had a restaurant called La Porta. And we used to go there and eat there a lot. She died of cancer a couple of years ago.
Oh, sorry to hear
Very
that.
sad. But when she, she actually wanted to talk to me about selling her restaurant. So I went over and went through her account. She sent me her account, so I went through all the stuff. Then went over and had a chat with her about how to price the restaurant, what her strategy ought to be, what other things she would do, and so on. And I learned a couple of things. One is, actually, restaurants in Italian are not necessarily particularly different to restaurants in London. So, the same principles apply. It sounds like play it again, Sam, doesn't it? But the other thing was that there were similar kind of social obligation ties that underpin things that, if you get them right, make the whole thing work, with her suppliers and the way she dealt with the local council and all those kinds of things. Now, they were different, probably much more based around that social and trust interaction and closed family kind of connections in Italy than you would get in London. But, Bocca di Lupo, for example, we operate on a principle of our suppliers. We pay them. We make sure they're paid on time. We have exceptional relationships with them. And that is actually quite an Italian way of doing business. You make sure that those people who are part of your network, you make sure they're okay. So, in a sense, I've learned a lot from the Italians in that sense.
That's wild. Yeah.
Which makes a great deal of sense. Whereas if you approach it from, not exactly Anglo-Saxon, as the French would say, but, a more American transactional perspective, it's not so good.
Well, I used to deliver cheese around London,
Right.
a man in a van. Like, I finished uni, I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I was like, I'll just go and do this. Again, retrospectively, 'cause you can
Yeah,
be clever
sure.
with this, but it was very fortuitous because this was 2016, but I ended up spending 12 hours a day listening to podcasts. But I would drive, do you know Harvey and Brockless? They did cheese
Oh, yeah.
dairy.
No, I have heard them.
Yeah. So you may have seen their vans. But one thing I did notice was in different types of restaurants. So when you go into an Italian restaurant, like in London, they're so warm to you. They're like, "Do you want some bread? Do you want some? Do you want a sausage? Do you want a
Exactly right.
Do you want a coffee?" Go and drop it into. I won't say, but it's off. Like, and obviously the other thing again, which is really interesting lesson, as soon as you put on one of those yellow high vis jackets and you have a trolley, people treat you like a piece of shit. Like, and it's just you realise like how honestly
it's
disgusting.
that is a general life lesson.
Yeah.
I remember before I went to university, I was sponsored at university by what was called Post Office Telecommunications, and I did a year before university doing various things, and I went around with an engineer in the local area, and I went to the IBM offices in Richmond, and the secretary there treated me like a piece of shit.
Yes, yeah.
And I always remember that. And I always remember that that you should never do that, right? Everybody deserves respect. And that Italian thing where you get welcomed in and so on is part of that. You're part of it. It comes from our society in the United Kingdom was largely destroyed by the Industrial Revolution.
How so?
Well, there's a chap called not Laurie Lee. He's the character from Cider with Rosie. Or he wrote Cider with Rosie. Laurie. Anyway, I'll remember the name in a second. But he wrote a book called The Way We Were. Now, the way that society used to be organised in England, in particular, but elsewhere, was based around households. And the household would be the baker, or would be knitting wool, or would be doing these other activities, would be a farm, or whatever it was. But these households varied in size. They didn't usually get bigger than about 40 or 50, but that's how we were organised. And that was the social fabric. Industrial Revolution came along, and people then became these individuals. I mean, they might be members of families, but they were basically individuals. They were atomized and made to work within a system that destroyed that particular kind of social fabric, that kind of the village life, or even in towns. I mean, towns weren't very big in those days, a few 100,000 at most, where it was that kind of not collective, that household system, because it wasn't collective at all. But the household system worked. And so what you then did was, instead of having that kind of friendliness and give and take, which was part of what the Italians have managed to retain, we destroyed it, because we put everybody through this mincing machine that turned into the big factory towns in Manchester or Birmingham, and destroyed their fabric.
Because the Industrial Revolution, it started here way before we got it. Like, not got it, but like it happened in England or Britain way before like the other rest of Europe. Why was that? Why did we? Is it because we had access to coal, or like? Because we essentially, it was like the why did we get it so much earlier? Did that fund the empire as well?
That's an entire 12-volume book in itself, right?
Let's try to do it in 12 minutes. But yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Is that what funded the empire essentially, or was that the empire?
Or did the empire fund the Industrial Revolution as well? Well, again, it's a complicated system. Let's go through how did the Industrial Revolution get going?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the Black Death.
Right.
So we're back in the 1340s.
Yeah.
Okay. So
what happened though?
Well, firstly, as a result of a combination of climate change and disease, we lost about 40% of our population.
Wow.
That destroyed the feudal system.
Feudal system
being where your lord and master owned you. You were basically an indentured servant. You were a slave. You were a
fucking hell.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everything you produced was owned by him.
Yeah.
Right. And you had no real agency. You couldn't do anything. So the whole thing was frozen, a bit like Egyptian civilization or anything else. So we were frozen in this feudal system. big catastrophe comes along. 40% of the population gone. There's lots of spare land. The land needs to be worked. And so people have to start paying people to work the land. So we're now making a transition to a cash economy.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yep.
people can now develop specialist labor, and now they can sell that labor. And now you've got the beginnings of a breakaway from that feudal system into something that ends up with the Tudors being able to then construct a political system on top of that, where there are guilds, where there are people working, doing specialist things. And by the time you get to the Stuarts, so we're getting into the
Wait, what's the difference between the Tudors and the Stuarts?
So Tudors are basically the 1500s.
So that's Henry VIII.
That's Henry VIII. Yeah, everybody knows Henry.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Henry VIII, right? Everybody
History
knows
for
Henry.
dummies over here,
But
mate.
there's also, you know, this revolution keeps on rolling, right?
Yeah.
So with Henry VIII, you get this change, breakaway from Rome, and I mean, you know, Henry VIII can be seen as as quite an autocrat and quite a revolutionary figure in destroying things. But it's kicked off because of this Black Death. But there's also the beginnings of the idea of invention, and I mean, because there's a bit going on the continent. Of course, this is a big picture thing here. But so you get the 1500s with the Tudors, and they begin to have to construct a political regime to be able to deal with this economy that's now developing. One of the things will be sheep. Sheep are now being farmed, and people are now being able to produce wool and weave, and because of these specialist trades, and they're now trading all of that. And places in the United Kingdom are becoming very rich because of the wool trade. And you know, you need a political system to be able to cope with all of that. So that's all going on. And then you make this. The Elizabeth comes along, and we discover the New World, and all this stuff opens up. And there's enormous amounts of cash floating in because the Spaniards have gone off and done the Armada. This is the point at which, towards the end of Elizabeth's reign, this is where Ayance in Spain makes the first steam engine, right? Mm-hmm. And then...
What year is that?
That's 1603, 1605, something like that.
Yeah.
And there's this flowering of inventiveness. It's Shakespeare. It's all...
Is that the Renaissance? Or is that Enlightenment?
The Renaissance is before that.
Right.
Right? This is more into the Enlightenment.
I've read a book. Sorry, I'm really curious.
We really are. We're all floating around.
Yeah, but this
right,
is perfect. Okay, so Renaissance that's when in Italy, doesn't it? It happens in Italy. I remember there's some guy called Poggio or something.
Well, so in the 11, 1200s, we begin to get a change, mainly driven out of Venice, but also the rich city-states in places like Florence and so on.
Yeah.
And patronage allows people to then have enough time to do really interesting things with works of art, and also to start to experiment with bits of science. In fact, if in a parallel universe, the University of Bologna turns out to be the most prestigious and advanced university in the world, but they went through a period where they clamped down on ideas and they became more conventional.
Wow.
Which meant that places like Cambridge and Oxford became the centres of that rather than Bologna. So there's perspective is a big thing. That happens 1200s or so. People start to realise that actually, instead of having these flat pictures, you now can actually draw perspective. And optics become important.
Wasn't that what Leonardo da Vinci was famous for, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Da Vinci is one of those, just extraordinary figures about, designing helicopters and bicycles as well as...
Fucking hell, I didn't know he did that.
Oh, yeah, he designed a helicopter. The helicopter would never have flown. It was a helix.
Yes.
But his bicycle would have worked. Had he had the materials for making that bicycle, because you need steel, proper steel for doing it.
Yeah.
Had he had the materials, he would have had a working bicycle.
Wow. That goes back to our thing about timing.
Yes, it's all about timing
Yes.
and what resources you have available.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So you've got all this stuff flowering on the continent, and in the United Kingdom in particular, you've had this massive change, and the development, as I say, of these trades. You know, people are now, they're paid for their labor, and it's a big change. Now you're paid for your labor, you can save, you can make your way up the social scale, there's less hierarchy, there's all sorts of stuff going on. There's the development of things like the wool trade. There's trade with these newfound lands that's going on. You know, people take sailing ships and they go across to Newfoundland and start bringing cod back.
Wow.
Getting fresh cod. I mean, the stories of of the Newfoundland banks where you could literally put your hands in the water and pick up a fish. Not the case anymore, of course, because it's been overfished. But that's what it used to be like. So there's this kind of big boost to the economy, and then in the 1600s, people began to start to use. They were already using coal in the 1500s, but in the 1600s, the two things start to happen. One is you want to get coal out, but you need to have a way of pumping water out of mines so you can do mining properly, and that's where Thomas Newcomen comes in with his beam engine in the early 1700s. Before that, the Stuarts there were experiments with steam engines to be able to make that work. But by the time you're getting to the end of the 1600s, beginning of the 1700s, there begins this self-reinforcing loop.
Positive
Self-reinforcing loop, which is that I can now extract energy from the ground.
Yeah.
And I can then use it to build the technology that allows me to extract energy from the ground more efficiently.
Yes.
Right?
Okay, yeah.
So that is the beginning of that industrial revolution. Now, what I can do is I can smelt iron. I can now start to produce steel. I can do all these other things that are going to be the foundation of everything else that's going to happen. And in the mid-1700s, Thomas Telford comes along, well, slightly earlier than that. Firstly, there are the canals that start to blossom because you need to ship these goods around. So we get these super highways, these canals, that can now transport goods long distance without very, very cheaply compared to what you had to do before. Because
They're man-made, those canals.
there's man-made canals, and there were networks of them all the way.
And was that like, did other countries have canals, or like?
No, not really.
Not like we had like the best system.
We were
Who came up with the canals?
The guys who needed to haul coal into Manchester.
There wasn't like okay, interesting.
It was all done by private raising of money.
Yeah.
And to get the land, you had to have Acts of Parliament, but Parliament had time to do those kinds of things at the time. So that's the way that worked. So the canals start to blossom. You can now transport these goods, and now that you can transport these goods, you start to be able to build bigger cities. And this is the beginnings of places like Manchester and Birmingham, because you need people to come together to be able to get the scale, to be able to take the opportunities from these new things. And if you now go forward to the chapter of my book on the Lunar Society in 1765, that's the next stage in that process, where you have enough industrialists and people who are engaged, like Wedgwood, in making pottery and building huge factories for making pottery, which is now enabled by the use of the coal that previously was inaccessible, but can now be pumped. You can pump the water out and you can transport it with the canals, and you can take his finished goods and you can transport them on the canals, so you can get them out to these big centres of population. The whole thing is now beginning to go like this and really hum. And when James Watt comes along with his idea for an efficiency for every 10 units of energy being put in, James Watt saved you 8 or maybe 9. He was nearly getting on.
What did he invent?
Well, the previous steam engine wasted a lot of heat.
Right.
James Watt's idea was to recycle that heat.
With you.
And reuse it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then he also had another thing which was called a governor, which basically spun round, and if it went too fast, it closed the valve, and as it went slower again, it opened the valve, so you could do something at a constant speed.
Wow. Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
That enabled a whole series of other things, big expansion in the ability to make stuff. And Birmingham, in particular, became this kind of workshop of the world, and we started to then export manufactured goods out to this empire that was now growing, right? And so we were then able to sell stuff out to people and get stuff back. So we were getting, and we imported things like Indian cotton or cotton from the southern United States, which happens in the early 1800s, to be able to then fuel our industries, which were now burning coal, right, to be able to make them work. And that takes us into the early 1800s. And at that point, you are really into the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
But to put it into perspective, even by 1760, when Thomas Telford was building his first iron bridge, there's an iron bridge near Telford, and if you haven't seen it, you should go and walk across it, because it's the first iron bridge in the world. And just up the road in Shrewsbury is the first iron-framed building, which then led to every skyscraper in New York, right?
Fuck off. Sorry, but like, what? So that's in Telford?
Sorry, that's in Shrewsbury.
Shrewsbury?
In Shrewsbury, there is the
What,
first...
is it a skyscraper, or it looks like a skyscraper?
It was the first building, I think it's 8 stories high, and you could not build more than 6 stories with brick. But because you've got an iron frame building, you could build 8 stories. And then that led to Manhattan. And that was directly because of that building, you now have Manhattan.
That's so wild. That is so wild. The sky, again, and just like almost in a global perspective, understanding how serendipity and systems work. That's what we're getting really into now. So
let's pick up on that.
Yeah.
So, for example, Priestley, who was a member of the Loner Society, when the riots happened, which were called the Priestley riots,
what were the riots about?
They were basically, these people in the Lunar Society had these dangerous scientific ideas. We are solid British people. We do not like these new ideas. They are somehow interfering with our culture and the way in which we like our society to be organised. And there was a riot to destroy them.
Wow, okay. Yeah.
And it was largely driven by fear of the French Revolution. So this happens in 1793. The French Revolution, 1789.
Yeah, because I've read about Napoleon quite a bit, but
Napoleon comes to power about that time, about 1793, right?
Yeah.
He comes in as the kind of great general who's going to solve everything and sort out everything. So he takes over in France.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's interesting about systems as well, isn't it? Like how he overtook that.
Well, because the French Revolution happened, there were a bunch of psychopaths who then took over. They started executing everybody, and it really got very nasty.
What was that called? That was like the...
Well, there was a thing called the Committee of Public Safety.
Yeah.
Which was, like all these political names, it's like the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, It's not really...
But I swear, like Napoleon, he looked at the system, again to what we're talking about, he looked at the system and understood that he could basically manoeuvre his way up.
Yeah, that's right. And he did that.
Let's quickly wrap it up then.
Yeah, okay.
You can, David, you've got to run. And as like, it's one of those ones where it's sort of, you forget how quick. I didn't even look at the thing. I was like, fuck me, we've been going for like almost 3 hours.
Yes,
but
I know.
It's kind of just flows.
Yeah.
So just quickly, I don't know how we sort of end this because we've got 5 minutes, but if we could wrap up what we're talking about, the worldview of systems.
Okay. So, look, writing my book about serendipity, it doesn't happen by accident, has kind of codified for me, made me think through and then be able to write explicitly what I've observed and why it happens. And it happens because of these networks that connect people.
Yeah.
And the way in which you have this interaction between chance, these networks, and the prepared mind. You've got to be interested in people. You've got to be curious. You've got to have a prepared mind to be able to take those opportunities and how they work. So that's essentially the point of the book. Mm-hmm. And it's explored in a lot of different ways in historical context. And I try and look at it in terms of how technology affects that, how it works in organizations, what it means for how politics work and how we govern ourselves and so on. But the bit that I want to do next is about systems, because I think there are some really interesting things to talk about systems and try and explain why systems behave in ways that you are not expecting and why simple answers to complex problems really don't work. Mm. Now, I was started off on thinking about that by walking past a friend's computer where he was looking at a lorry load of sparrows. And I asked him what he was doing. He said, well, the Chinese communist government decided that the birds were eating all the plants. So they eliminated all the small birds. And then that allowed the insect population to burst, explode, and then that did far more damage to the crops than the birds had ever done. So they then had to import sparrows from Russia to repopulate.
Wow.
Right? And I think that's probably going to be the beginning of my book on systems, which will be just how does this stuff operate?
Yeah. I think, just to wrap up, I think from today is tons learning about business, but ultimately, even no matter how hard it is right now if you're a restaurateur, or got a restaurant business, no matter how hard it is if you've got a brand, ultimately, in London, we are so lucky. Like, we've got one of the best systems in the world. We've got the best restaurants. You've got this idea of competition where people are cooperating. The UK supermarket system, grocery system, is the best in the world. You know, if you go to Australia, it's a duopoly between Coles and Woolworths. Here, you don't get into Asda, you knock on Morrison's door. You don't get to Morrison's, you knock on Sainsbury's door. Our system is the best. And I think actually being grateful, like, as what I've taken from this, that actually here, as much as people complain about our sad little wet island, it's actually pretty fucking good.
Yeah, it is really good. And I know, you know, there's a trend against the use of the word diversity, but diversity here is really important. Diversity is important in ecological systems because it makes them robust. Diversity in what we've got here makes it robust. We have a lot of different kinds of restaurants. We have a lot of different kinds of people. We have a lot of ways of sharing that information. We have an open, collaborative attitude to doing things, which actually then enables us to share information and do things better. And as a result, I think the whole, if I could call it an ecosystem in that sense, is a lot richer. It's a lot more interesting, and it's a lot better than some other places that I've been in the world, where, as you say, either you have monopoly systems, or that you have the whole thing is dominated by large chains. And those large chains are a bit like turning up to your garden pond and finding it's covered with algae. It's nothing is going to live in that. I mean, it's just awful. What you want is variety. And we have that, particularly in places like London or Manchester now. You have got that variety. And let's celebrate it. Let's network together. As I say in my book, the good things happen with serendipity because of those networks. That you enable the chance things to happen, you network together, and you have the prepared mind. You've got the right attitude about recognizing things when the opportunity comes along.
Absolute pleasure, David.
Dan.
So
that's all right. Do that. Do a real wrap up.